Hey there everyone, SupernovaBlade here with the 14th rendition of Stories in History. In this volume, I'll basically be explaining what my time between now and when I released the previous Stories in History video has been like. If you read the title, it would seem rather self-explanatory to explain what exactly has happened to me. This is the full timeline of the 6 months I spent doing a door-to-door sales job and how it was way more mentally taxing than I would have ever wished. But first, let me talk about the art that's playing in the background of the video. The art playing in the background of this video are the remaining few OC reference sheets I've finished since I released the previous Stories in History video, which are of my characters Melandria, Sab, and Lara, and there's also some time lapses of some characters that I'd also finished in the past few months. The links to both the Unveil page, where I talk about these original characters, as well as the Imager links to those drawings will be included in the description below. Anyway, on to the story. Now, I'll actually be structuring this volume a smidge bit differently than a lot of my other Stories in History videos, since I am going to be structuring the different weeks of the job in different parts throughout the video. To make it easier to navigate, I'll put the timestamps in both the description and the comment section. There are 27 different sections after the introduction, because I was in the job for 27 weeks in total, and I'm going to talk about the events and thought processes I had when the job was going on. Let me tell ya. It has a lot to unpack, so this is going to be a very long Stories in History video for sure. For context, I'm no longer in the job, and I'm moving on with other endeavors now, but I believe that it is most appropriate to start from the beginning, shall I? When I graduated college, I was basically thrown into the open area of the pool to navigate this atrocious job market. And I had learned from talking with some people that my field of study wasn't necessarily one that was promising with easily finding work. In this economy, I don't even think such a thing even exists. After a month and a half after I graduated, I moved into a house that was partially owned by my father and his brothers that was previously left uninhabited since I needed a place for solitude and to find other job opportunities. I kept trying week after week to find something, anything, until something finally came up. In its vaguest terms, mostly to keep the company anonymous, it was a sales representative job, which wasn't exactly what I was trying to get, but I threw my application into the void to hope I may get something out. Just never know. It could land me something. Through enough trial and error, I was invited for an interview on a Wednesday to hear first about the company and what we hoped to achieve from the people we were hiring. I don't really remember much about what was said, since it was mostly a bunch of business mumbo-jumbo, but I felt like I could still find a good balance between my design work and this job without many issues. By that point, it was all just playing the waiting game to see what they have to say. If I recall, there wasn't too many people in the call. Other than the admin of the company, it was just me and one other person. Before I knew it, the interview was done, and I was to keep a steady eye on my email to see if I'd be accepted for a second round interview. Time passes on, and I would later get an email or phone call or something saying, "Congratulations, we decided to consider you for the second round interview tomorrow. What time would work best for you, 9:30 or 10:30? I chose the former time and made sure I was available by then for the interview. The next morning, I checked the time for the interview, and then went through the more in-depth version of what the company offered. The company was actually a company with a much larger company as their main client, which I won't say which company, but it was a telecommunications company, and I had this company for my home internet and phone anyway. I'll be honest, if it wasn't for the fact that I used the company itself, I would have not chosen this job in the first place. So, of course, I knew of the company that was our client, so I felt more comfortable talking about its features and benefits with people to get them to understand how it is superior to their competitors. We start by doing some office work and then go out into the world in order to get paid consistently. Seems legit, and I could deal with this without too many things going wrong. Judging by the remaining length of the video, I think you can tell where this is going. In that second interview, the woman talking to me talked about the pay being more commission-based and how we started in an entry-level position for about 6 weeks and then get promoted out to a manager. Sounds easy peasy, right? She talked about the job responsibility, and she said some things about going to people's homes. Sounds a little weird, but I can't say I wouldn't be able to do something like that. I had to explain my points of view, whatever I believe. She just dropped her whole life story about a time she was able to persevere and why she did the job's responsibilities. She also talked about the culture and how sometimes the people get competitive with their work to the point that they would have to do challenges like getting an ice bucket dumped on their head or having to eat baby food covered in hot sauce. I just thought, okay, that seems a little much, but I mean, not everybody will need to do that since I'm not a very competitive person. I could choose to back out of that kind of thing. After all, I don't believe that seems very professional. Once that interview was done, I didn't have any questions. Neither did the other guy on the interview, who wasn't the same as the previous interview, giving the implication that the other person didn't make it. In the end, I was told that the company was going to be calling me, and whoever was hired would be getting that call later that afternoon, and I should watch my phone for the news. After that, I tuned in some streams, some Twitch streamers I enjoyed watching, while having my phone next to me awaiting a potential call. Before too long, at about 2 p.m. that day, I got a call from the admin who did the first interview and asked, "Is this Supernova?" And I said, "Yes." And they basically said, "Congratulations, we decided to hire you for this job. Your start date will be this upcoming Monday. Make sure you bring a notebook, pen, and 2 forms of ID, because you will be asked to take notes and verify your identity during your orientation day." It is pretty clear that I was finally happy to be out of the black hole that was the job market, so unforgiving. I told my family about the future events and how they were all rather thrilled that I finally was getting a job, a source of income coming through the door so I can help with paying these bills. I spent the remainder of that week preparing for the week ahead because my orientation was coming up very soon. Before long, the week came. With this first week, I was told to come to the office at 1:30 in business casual to business professional clothes with my notebook and ID ready. I also brought a volume of Which Hat Atelier to read, thinking I was going to be in a big auditorium or something for the orientation for the new job, and I had that in my downtime. I arrived rather early since I was so godforsakenly early. I got lunch at nearby Five Guys and told the workers that it was my first day on the job. I was very thrilled in that moment for sure. Before long, I got to the room I needed to go to, and there was one girl already waiting in the room for the orientation to start. The orientation was led by the admin because our CEO was out sick. The orientation was very long, to say the least. It was a lot of information basically thrown at us, and we were told to memorize a lot of the stuff. There were quite a bit of us, actually. I don't remember how many, but we were filling the room rather packingly. I'm not even sure if that's even a word, but I'm still going to use it. We went over how to complete our modules that made us eligible to sell a product like this through a second-party method. We were told that once we build a team and be able to sell this product around an adequate speed, we can become our own businesses doing the same, but it was likely only a few of us would reach that point. The main thing we had to memorize was an 8-step process of becoming successful in the business world, those being having positive attitudes, being on time, being prepared, making every minute count, making good use of our time and what is around us, keeping a positive attitude even when negatives are getting thrown in our faces, understanding why the hell we're even here at this job, and being in control of whatever we're doing. There were also some other things that we had to memorize, but I don't remember them. The long orientation ended at about 6:30, and we were told to come in at about 11 o'clock the following day to start with our first days in the office and the field. The next day, I got to meet some of the other people at the office, other than my leader, who often worked the front desk when the admin wasn't there. For context, most of the people who are leaders would alternate between an upstairs room where I had my orientation and a downstairs room, the room I was told was the company's office. And my leader hardly left the downstairs office because she had a problem with her leg. My first station was going over how the days of the field went and the types of people we're likely going to find. We do about 3 laps around the selected territory, chosen by the higher-ups, to find different people likely to need or want the services. Except, the people don't want this, so to us, we're just door-to-door people like the other companies like the roofing people, Jehovah's Witnesses, and so forth. We had to introduce ourselves as customer service agents to make ourselves seem different. Also, about half the people from the orientation weren't even there at all. After that was done, we had to practice our pitch and then go over how to interact with the people in this world, and we would get critiqued as we practiced. After a bit of time, we would go over to the upstairs room and go over some announcements about people performing well in the field, our compliance statement, the weather, yada yada yada. Since this was in the summer, it was likely talking about staying hydrated and not passing out. After all that, we were assigned particular car rides, which I did have my own car, but I didn't assign myself to be a driver at first. I would later, which I will get to. I was in the car with this recently promoted leader who I'll call ES, and she was the driver. We were also put in a car with a leader who I will refer to as TJ, who was double training to other people. We stopped at a place to get lunch and got on the road to our destination. Except, wait a second, we can't just drive to the destination, we have to announce our goals or some shit like that. And since I just started doing this, I had to be preempted and then basically pull something out of my ass that was likely what they wanted me to say at least. After we dropped off TJ and her people, ES and I got to our territory. Our job was to knock on these doors and hope they answer, and then we tell them about our telecommunication services and how we can benefit them. Also, ES let me borrow her vest because she wore a hat with the telecommunications company logo, and I didn't have any gear that made it obvious what company we were with. It took a bit of time for us to get an answer, but our first answer was a man who was in the shower when we knocked and rang the bell. After a bit of time, we found some people who actually wanted the service. That or they were giving into ES and her tactics, because I'm just going to cut to the results. We signed up 7 people on that day, which apparently nobody had done that exact number before prior to then, so therefore ES got to name the term for it for the company. The best way to describe how we were able to get so many sales when we did was that we kept getting tossed around between different people in the neighborhood who all just kind of knew each other. One of them was this old lady with her fancy poodle, and for some reason her poodle loved to lick me over and over. We don't even know why, but this poodle would not lick the old lady or ES, only me. We eventually got to sit in strangers' homes and talk about them while ES signed them up, and I'm using that term a lot because it was rather clear that ES wouldn't let me do shit, and she way too many times just had me stand there and look pretty while we got tossed around. My naive mind at the time was probably thinking, wow, this is such an easy concept to go about. Perhaps I can make big bucks doing this kind of thing, unaware of what I'll be talking about later. How many minutes left in the video? Also, because this was summer, the damn mosquitoes were eating me up like a fucking buffet. ES recommended I try some off spray next time I enter the field in the summer, so I did that the next day. By the time it was evening, I ended up seeing video of what happened in a few neighborhoods down, where one of our other leaders, who I'll refer to as TN, started educating the stubborn old man about the new services in the neighborhood, because the telecommunications were rather new in the areas we were in, and he was convinced they were pulling his leg, and it eventually got to the point where he was basically yelling at TN and cussing her out. That was something I was overly cautious about when I realized this was a door-to-door job. This is not foreshadowing anything, right? At least it wasn't somebody getting a gun pulled on them or anything like that, because then we would have a major problem. I would quit on the spot if that ever happened to me. Eventually, when the day finished, we got back to the car, picked up TJ and her people, and then drove back to the office. Also, one major complaint I had about ES was her song preference. I can only describe the type of music she was playing as sex rap, because it was rap, and half of the songs were filled with nothing but sexual innuendos. I hated it. Anyway, the next day I stopped by Walgreens to get my off spray, and we went through the whole office spiel again, and I'll let y'all know that I am just not going to constantly be going over the office parts of the day, because that's not the main reasons I'm making this video, so I'll only mention it if it's necessary. I bought the off spray, as I mentioned before, and we were going back to the door-to-door field thing when we did the announcements. The leader doing the announcements was shocked to learn how ES did 7 sales in one day, and he said, "We had this person do 7 sales? Wow. Okay, give it up for ES." And then I shyly raised my hand and said, "Also, I was there." Phrasing it that way because I was just kind of there while ES did all the work because she did a terrible job at making me part of the process. The leader doing the announcements, who I'll call SS, then tried again and said, "We had these people doing 7 sales. Give it up for ES and Supernova." The car rides were the same, and so was the territory, except this time ES not only had to train me, but also another person from my orientation class. This time, we only closed about 4 people, but still, pretty good. Nothing super memorable happened except for how much I enjoyed some of the decorations of the houses. Once we were done, we picked up TJ and her people, and then stopped by a nearby shopping center so I could use the bathroom because being out for hours at a time could be hard on the bladder. I literally was about to have an emergency, and I went to as many places as I could that weren't the McDonald's, but they were either locked or didn't have a bathroom. Eventually, I just gave up on that and then used the McDonald's bathroom. I also got called the N-word while scrambling to find a bathroom, but that's beside the point. Then I would later find out that ES literally left me behind at the McDonald's and I had to call her at least 4 times before she picked up and actually, took me back to the office. I made it back eventually after ES proceeded to run too many red lights because she is an atrocious driver. The next day, instead of ES training me, TJ had to do it, likely because of our similar, much more quietly spoken personalities compared to a lot of the others. We were also put into a different car, someone who was on my second interview and on my team. Now, I talked about how I really did not enjoy the music ES put on, but what this person from my team put on, I had an even stronger dislike for. Imagine being in a car that has a lot of custom engines that make so many noises while hardcore gangster rap is blaring at an ear-splitting volume while the driver is constantly speeding down the highway. That's basically what I had to deal with this ride. Needless to say, I didn't enjoy it at all. Now, the leads we had this time were a little bit different since they were farther away and they were actually sets of apartments. Now, do you know what was the biggest difference between ES and TJ? TJ may have not been that much better at training, but one thing was for sure. She at least acknowledged that I was trying to grow and learn the business, even if her ideas was having me say the same things over and over until I got down. We got 3 sales that day. One from this man who gave TJ and I this imported Korean blueberry drink, and y'all have no idea how amazing that tasted. It was one of the greatest drinks I have ever drank, and I wish I could have it regularly. The second was a callback that TJ had with someone from an earlier day. The third was from a man who was getting his laundry, and we just so happened to strike up a conversation with him, and by we I mean mostly TJ, and it was later revealed that his cable and internet bill was so humongous, and I think TJ and I both agreed. Yeah, we need to save you from your bills. Now. Immediately. So TJ did most of the work, but she let me learn about the process as it came. We had to call our higher-ups above our company to deal with it, but we did it. Also, there was one door we knocked on where a naked child was there for some reason. TJ and I just looked at each other and she said, yeah, let's not knock on that door again. Later on, TJ had a phone call and she told me to stay put instead of continuing to knock on doors until the phone call was done. Once she got off the phone, she looked at me and said, Supernova, we have to go. Now. Later on, she would tell me what happened and basically, remember how I mentioned before that one of the fears I had was someone pulling a gun on me and I would immediately leave the company if that happened? It happened to the other people in our car ride. Specifically with the other leader, who I'll refer to as KW. See, KW grew up on the wrong side of the neighborhood and suffers a lot of PTSD over seeing people die from gunshots in front of him, and having it almost happen to him hurt him dearly. When she told me, I told her, this was one of my biggest fears with this job too, because I don't know what the hell to do in a situation like that. TJ told me in response that in her opinion, I was the least threatening looking person we had at the company at the time, so I didn't need to worry about that, but truth be told, you never know. Also, KW is a 6'4" black man, so she could see why he could have been perceived as a major threat. When we got picked up, KW was wearing a hood over his head, not speaking. The obnoxious hardcore gangster rap at ear-splitting volumes felt like nothing, because as it was pretty clear, we had bigger problems here, so I kept my mouth shut. The aftermath was that after this incident, KW would be taking a slight hiatus from going out into the field and stay working in the office for a little while before his mentality had healed enough. That following day, I was getting trained by another guy who had just gotten back from a road trip, who I will refer to as DT. DT was a rather chill guy who was on SS's team, and he was also training one of the 2 guys KW was training the previous day. Our territory just so happened to be right next to the territory I was in with ES days before, so at one point, we would have some leads in common. Also, this is when I decided I was just going to drive there myself. Just the 3 of us. When we arrived, I parked behind this car from someone who I guess really likes Hatsune Miku. I mean, I'll let you be the judge of that one. The funny thing was, The other guy in training, who I'll call Afro because he had an afro, called it a bad omen because he didn't trust anyone with a Hatsune Miku obsession. Anyway, I don't really remember much about the day other than how I was filling out the order documents for DT whenever we got a sale, which we got a few. There was also one other house we went to that stuck out, and by that, I mean it was a house that ES had as well, as I mentioned before. When we knocked on his door, the guy looked right at me and said, "I remember you!" And I found that rather amusing. If you have been keeping track of the days of the week, which I don't know if anyone would care, at this point, it would be the weekend. However, this job doesn't get Saturdays off, but does get Sundays off, and I'll put that very loosely as I'll mention throughout this video. On that Saturday, we had a shorter day where we ended more in the late afternoon instead of the evening, with the logic that more people will be home and willing to answer the door, which I understand, but it's not always 100% the case. The territory I was in by this point was near where we had lunch, and I was trained by TJ again. The territory sucked. We had almost no answers, and those who answered were very disgusted by us and were overly dismissive. TJ assumed that whoever was there before us just did a horrible job dealing with the leads, that they turned everyone against our product. So even though we could easily be good, because the person before was bad, they don't want the product at all, even if we tried. Sometimes it's just like that, and sometimes we had to learn that the hard way. After we finished, TJ had me take her to the grocery store so that she could buy more markers and use the bathroom while I chilled in the car. You know, my black car with no air conditioning in the blazing August sun. Props to people who deal with this more regularly than me. So remember when I mentioned that we were only sometimes getting Sundays off? Let me explain why. By sheer luck, or lack thereof for me, the Sunday after my orientation just so happened to be our quad annual regional conference. Because of this, since this was a required event for our company, we had to get up rather early in the morning and drive to Philadelphia in business professional clothing and hope to network with people from around the area, an introvert's worst nightmare, and hear about people being millionaires and the like. I had to drive someone from my team who I'll refer to as TM, and he basically talked his mouth off about everything while I mostly pretended to listen. Other than me, him, and our leader, there was nobody else on our team. Well, not going to lie, there were some parts of the conference that were really enjoyable. Hearing the stories were eye-opening, and at least it wasn't going door to door. Once that was done, I had to drive TM and Afro home since our dinner was canceled. Monday, we had newer people joining the company because apparently we do this every Monday. But I was still in training with TJ in an area that had a large Hispanic population, so there was a little more diversity in the areas we were going to. And I remember basically nothing other than running for my life to a McDonald's to not have a bladder emergency. I also think around this point, TJ was basically quizzing me about the success tips from orientation so that I would know them all without thinking about it, so I could be ready to do this whole door-to-door thing solo. Tuesday, I was in training with another leader who I'll refer to as JM. JM was a very different type of leader. He was very bubbly and was the type of person to make everyone around him smile. That day, he and I were in an area that was comparatively more run down, but still had quite a diverse population. I remember that when we started for that day, it was right when nearby elementary school was getting out because of how late in the afternoon we started. The third house we knocked on was this African lady with her 5 children or something, and JM, being himself, managed to immediately captivate this lady, and it got to the point where we did a sale, and she in return offered us some rice and beans as a meal. That was the most memorable part of the day, since even in a day where door-to-door people are mostly shunned, sometimes you'll find those people who are genuinely treat you like an actual person who is trying. It's like that meme of, give that bitch a break, as a parody of, if you give a mouse a cookie. I don't remember too much about the rest of the training with JM, other than how he was really good at training compared to someone like ES or TJ. One other thing I remember happening was us going to this house and the owner not being home. But they went all out with their cheesy decorations. Perhaps I might come back to check them out someday, but I've been in that. Wednesday, I had one more training day with TJ that I remember basically nothing about other than the fact that it happened, but apparently after that happened, TJ felt I was ready to start doing this telecommunications door-to-door thing solo. So I would go out solo for the following day, aka Thursday. So Thursday came and I was tasked with going solo from here on out. The territory I was at was around the same area as Monday. I had several story apartments which I literally could not access without barging into their homes, which is a blatant breach of privacy. I tried and I pried until it was almost time for the day to be over, and I came across this lady who was paying about $343 for her television, home internet, and security systems. And I was all like, say no more, I can offer you a better deal, and before long, I closed her. She also gave me water because this is August still. Funny enough, TJ called me and asked, where the hell are you? We need to go back. And I had to tell her, calm yourself. I'm with a customer right now. When word came out, my leader, who I will refer to as PS, basically had so much happiness and was very happy throughout every chat. Understatement. The following day, I tried doing the same thing, but everything was not going as fishingly. By the end, I had a rather unfortunate turn of events with some old lady. She was getting overpaid for her television service with the competitor, so I told her I could give her a better deal with TV and internet. I decided to give her the TV test drive, which gives a free trial of our highest package, with some selected channels, which were mostly fishing channels because her husband loves fishing. Since I knew my experience could have been rather limited, I called up SS to help me with the sale. Except the woman spent like 30 to 45 minutes trying to figure out what the hell was going on with the TV package, and it eventually got to the point where she just got so godforsakenly flustered and she just hollered out, this is too complicated, I'm just going to stick with what I have now. I'm so sorry, I wasted your time, waste my time, and yada yada yada. And I just threw my hands in the air and was just like, it is what it is. On Saturday, there was a conflict between both ES and one of the news stars from the week that led to the two yelling at each other, and shortly after that happened, the news star didn't show up for a while. That led me to think he got fired after the exchange. I would hear months later that ES started it, since she had a bad attitude. The day in the field wasn't really anything of note other than being close to my home neighborhood and knocking on the door of a person who worked for the competitor, which sounds awful, but I honestly laughed at the occasion. I have to keep myself entertained somehow because this system is making me dead inside. It gets so much worse. After that, I finally got a day off. Sorta. I say sorta because many teams, mine included, would have their personal team meetings on Sundays, but that was only one part of the day. But also, if we made a sale on a Sunday, we got paid double. I'd rather have the rest because I didn't want to work not at 100% for this job personally. Others approach this differently, and that's okay. It's just a personal preference. 2 weeks in, I'm now going solo, and let's see where this is going. It's also September by this point, so that's the thing. What happens next? Well, short answer, a lot. Long answer, we'll get into that. What I mean by 4 different days, 4 different hours, is that I got home at 4 different hours in the first 4 days of the week. Let me explain. The first day, Monday, was Labor Day, so we got off early for the day at 6 p.m. Or at least, we were supposed to. Instead, TJ, who was the main leader in our car ride, instead had us push some extra time because she wanted to. Like, I guess specifically deciding to go overtime to get closer to reaching your goals, but in a way, what she was doing was a little selfish. Not in a rude way, but only caring about what she wants and against the personal preferences of others. I couldn't get anything done that day specifically. I couldn't talk to people well, let alone build any meaningful connections, and most people were gone for the holiday anyway. The motto we were given was, oh, it's Labor Day, so everyone is home. A few cookouts here and there were present, but truth be told, I felt like I was in a territory where most people probably were visiting family for Labor Day at other houses. Of the answers I did get, the only one that stood out was one guy who told me to stop talking hypothetically because that just makes you an awful door-to-door salesman, and he gave me a religious pamphlet for some reason. Anyway, so because of TJ's tendencies, we kept going for an extra hour and a half, going until 7:30, and by the time we got back to the office and dealt with everything we needed to deal with and I got home, it was 9:20. Tuesday, I was sent solo to another territory that was in the city, a very run-down part of the city. I don't remember much about the territory other than the sick guy, as in he was feeling ill, who literally said to my head, you know, you're not the first person trying to sell me telecommunications at my door, but for sure you have been the nicest one. Typically in the door-to-door world, you are wanting to be pushing the needle to get them convinced, but that's just not my personality. That really begs the question, why the hell am I even still in this job? That's a good question. Anyway, by the end of the night, I was getting ready to leave because it was 8 p.m. and that's the time we usually end. Plus, we're in a very rundown part of the city and the sun's going down, so who knows what crazy things will happen. I don't feel safe doing this kind of thing in an environment like this. When I checked my phone, the first person to respond was TJ, and she sent a message that said, "So we're gonna push till 9. In my mind, I was about to crash out and just sit in my car in frustration and leave, which is a logical way to respond in such a situation, in my eyes at least. A little bit later, the other people in our car ride, like JM and TM and some other guy we'll refer to as Cruz, would respond, and they were all in the same boat as me. We are not pushing until 9 p.m. in the middle of a city that still has a crime problem. That's not safe. So therefore, we left afterwards, and then they all started acting like young kids, and I was the distressed parent because they saw a billboard for a McDonald's, and they were all like, "We want McDonald's! Take us to McDonald's, Supernova!" I told them, no, we're going back to the office, but they kept begging me, and eventually I was just like, okay, fine, you go to McDonald's if it'll make you happy. I then indulged myself in a McFlurry because we actually went to a McDonald's with a functioning ice cream machine. Shocking, I know. Actually, TJ went to Popeyes next door, but after we got our food, we finally went back to the damn office, and I was just done for the night. However, before I was about to leave, TM approached me and asked, "Hey, can you take me home?" And upon some future talks I would have, I should have just told him no, but since I didn't want to let someone from my own team down, I begrudgingly gave him the ride back home, which took longer because where I live was east of the office, whereas where TM lived was west. So it used up more gas and then it really needed to. When I finally got home, it was 10:27. On to the next day, which is Wednesday. On this Wednesday, my territory was changed again, this time to a small village nearby to a church, and each street was named after either a saint or something having to do with the Crusades. I don't really remember much about what was happening around that time of the day, but rather what came afterwards. When I came back, my company's CEO gathered up all the different names of the people from the most recent 2 orientation classes, and he got to decide who was worthy on a dinner on his dime. By that point, there were only 3 people left in my orientation class because my orientation class were dropping like flies. I guess they couldn't take the door-to-door thing like I was. He then decided on taking me as the only person from my orientation class and 2 people from the orientation class the week after me. I will mention these people later, so I will give them a few nicknames too. L and Q. There were also some other leaders like SS who were with us as well. We all had dinner at the Green Turtle, and the CEO said he would pay for all of our food. Since I decided to drive to the restaurant alone, once everything I needed to get done was done, I ended up being the first person there, so the CEO and I just had a one-on-one conversation while we waited for everybody else. In this dinner, our CEO just talked about how he got to this place in the workforce and how he saw potential in us all and how we can prevail. It was rather fun. It was a breath of fresh air from all the stress of the stupid door-to-door job. Once it was all fine, we started leaving, we said goodbye and went home. I also kind of avoided paying for parking by parking in the parking lot of a nearby Domino's because I'm too f***ing frugal. By the time I was home, it was 11:33. Thursday! It was really hot and I was back in that area with the high Hispanic population and a lot of other ethnicities. Except this time, I was near a creek, so there were quite a few beach-style houses in the neighborhood. At one point, I heard back from one of the people from the previous day who was interested, and I signed him up over the phone. I don't really remember much about the day, except for this one house very early on. I can let you be the judge on who's on the wrong side of the situation, because it could have been me in the wrong, or it could have been the other guy who owned the home in the wrong. Let me explain. When I came up to this one house, they had some chairs blocking their top steps, and because I'm not a sim, I just moved the chair a little bit to let myself through. I knocked on the guy's door and awaited a response. The man answers the door, and right in the middle of greeting him, he instantly starts yelling something like, "Hey, those chairs are there? Don't you know not to go on someone's porch when there are chairs there? Go away, scram, you're not welcome here." Something like that. I then just left and went to the next house. Thinking about it now, on the other hand, what I should have said to him was, "Sir, you are aware that this is a blatant fire hazard. Hypothetically, if you have those chairs blocking your porch and stairs, and your house is actively on fire, how are you supposed to get out of your house without burning alive?" I don't think he thought about that one. Also, I remember seeing a broken lawn ornament of Kenny from South Park, but I forgot to take a picture of it. Missed opportunity. Anyway, when the day was done, I gathered my car ride, and once again, I had to drive someone else home. But this time I was driving her to her house in the same direction as where I lived, so it saved me a lot of time. Time back, 8:59. Friday. So remember how I mentioned that one of the things at this job was the competitive aspect and challenging people and the like? Well, I tried to back out of it the best I could, but we were all basically getting dragged into it. When I got out into the field, I managed to sign up this therapist lady who I was attracted by her political flag, considering her views are very similar to mine. That, and she was one of my leads anyway, but I didn't get paid for it because she changed her mind. Her loss. However, the guy I was in competition with didn't get any sales, so he had to do push-ups and called me his big daddy. Unfortunately, I am not making that up. The last day of the week was Saturday, and we had one major obstacle facing us. What was this obstacle? Allow me to explain. See, on this Saturday, the city where we were was hosting a special event. It was a bicycle race between various peoples from the surrounding area. As a result of this, there were several warnings coming in that a plethora of the nearby roads would be closed for the day while the race was happening. And by sheer coincidence, the main road where my leads were on that day, which was the same as the previous day, was one of the roads closed for the bicycle race, and additionally, this was also the day where I probably gave myself the worst bladder problems, and it would cause a downward spiral for the rest of my time at this job. I had to hold in my urine for 5 to 6 hours because there was no place with an open restroom. The only place with a restroom nearby was a Subway, and their bathroom was closed for some reason. What a shame. To make matters worse, other than not getting any sales that day, when it came time for us to get picked up, I found out our driver, ES, got sick and had to leave the field early. Plus, also L was with us and he got sick too. He had never showed up to the job again. After a bunch of messy conversations and the like, we ultimately got an Uber back to the office. All of this waiting while holding in my urine for almost an entire quarter of a day, and it was starting to rain. One of our leaders, who I'll call D, and there's a lot of nicknames here, asked me, "Did you get to go yet?" And I told her, "Nope," and held it in the whole car ride. And when we got back to the office, I ran as fast as I could to the bathroom, so throughout all those trials and tribulations, another week was done. On to the 4th week of doing door-to-door, and I really had to give myself some credit. It is honestly surprising I even made it that far since this job has such high turnover, and as I mentioned before, most people at the orientation had not made it that far. And the company does that on purpose. It doesn't really surprise me that the sales and marketing industry has such a high turnover rate overall. So this week, as I gave in the title, I was back in the city again. For most of the week at least. Monday I was actually not in a very rundown part of the city, but rather a more modern and refurbished part of the area. Nearly every house had several stories with cameras in each of their doorbells. I literally only remembered one thing about this territory, and it was just about how uncomfortable it made me feel because of all the cameras on the doorbells. Seriously, it happened at one point where I came up to a guy's porch and he showed me a video of me knocking on one of the previous houses. Very surreal. I ended up not getting any sales there, but someone did give me an orange, so there's that. Tuesday, I was back in the rundown part of the city, and I managed to sign up this one guy while also trying to deal with my biggest temptation in getting to this territory, the ice cream truck. Because I was closing someone, I missed the ice cream truck. I guess now we know where my minimal amounts of money was going to in this job. There was one other man I almost closed, but I didn't because he had to leave and pick up his kids from school. But put a pin in that because we will get back to this man later. So I guess it doesn't come as a surprise to anyone that when we were given leads in the city, especially in an area with a lot of crime, that we had a lot of invalid leads, i.e. homes destroyed, homes that were abandoned, also a lot of vacant houses with no furniture and the like. The rest of the week went basically the same. Go to the rundown city, knock on some houses, you might close some people. I closed this one old church lady that following Thursday, and I almost closed 2 others, but one had bad credit, and the other literally left me hanging after 2 hours, and only offered me water. After that Thursday, we went bowling, and I suck at bowling real bad, but that's beside the point. I ended that week in the town a little closer to home, since I basically used up the entirety of that rundown city neighborhood, but unfortunately couldn't get anything of note to happen. However, by the end of the week, while I was waiting for the rest of my car ride to be done, I got the news that due to family problems, TM had to leave the team. likely just leaving my leader, PS, and myself as the only people in our team. Since the guy with the hardcore gangster rap and the loud engine didn't really last in order to focus on his mechanic work or something like that. It's kind of a shame. So this week in the city really blended all together, which is why I didn't really talk about it that much. But some days in this door-to-door business are just like that. Now on to the next week, which is when things get a little ugly. As the title suggests, let me break the day down of how this slump had started. After a Sunday of relaxing and getting some chili, I was pressed into a very hard week. Before I go into that, I'll go over something that happened before entering the field either this week or the last that I hinted earlier in the video. See, when I was talking about the third week, I referred to one of the people on that Tuesday as Cruz. And one of the weeks, something happened, a bit of an awkward situation, as in a I don't belong here, but I feel that this could be insightful type of way. Let me explain. When we were doing our office work every morning, usually before the entry-level individuals would come in, all the leaders would get into a room with the CEO and talk about ways for the company to improve and important matters that need to be addressed on that selected morning. One morning, I wandered into one of these meetings, and by sheer coincidence, they were talking about Cruz. Now, when I had Cruz as part of my car ride, something about him seemed a little off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But what I was able to put a finger on was how he suddenly disappeared shortly after that day, despite him being the leader. As I listened in, I was able to pick up on a major context clue about why the leaders were having this meeting. Cruz was about to be fired due to a large amount of no-call, no-shows, and him basically being radio silent the whole time. Not a good look for him at all, so everyone was in agreement, he's out of here. I would later hear through the grapevine that Cruz hated working for the company, and to not work for the company, he literally booked a cruise for himself to get away from them. Now you know why I specifically referred to him as Cruz. On to talking about my week and how I got into a slump. My week was off to a pretty shitty start in the field because I had my first knock of the day go like this. Knock knock. Hello? Ring the doorbell. Door opens. Who are you? Introduces myself and why I'm here. Well, I don't want you on my property. Please go away. I understand that, sir. I know you didn't expect me to be here, but I still maybe you would be better off doing things instead of knocking on my door like an idiot. Slams door real hard. I then walked away and got reminded that this is supposed to be part of the process, and I have no reason to come back. But it was still uncalled for. The rest of the day only got worse and worse, and made it more and more relevant that this time things weren't going to be well. Didn't get any closes, but I did get close with one. Now, let me ask a question. Who would you trust in a situation about getting fast internet? A badged professional or your spouse? This one woman, very on par with the idea of faster internet, since who the hell wants slow internet? When we were about to go through with the links, her husband comes home. Impulse with this woman is pretty high. Her husband, probably not knowing what the reason I was here, just wanted me to leave his wife alone. She, I assume, was what we call a COWS, which is an acronym for someone who can't operate without someone, which of course means they can't make financial decisions for themselves and need someone else to make it for them. So basically, a lack of individuality with thinking about finances and purchases. As a result, she just said, yeah, now I don't want it, even though she spent the past 15 or so minutes talking about how she really wanted it. You see, that's the dangers that come with doing door-to-door, where one party can love the idea, and the other is unsure, and as they say, a confused mind says no, and the latter wins. In our business, we also have a phrase for that, husband kill. I guess that one really sucked, but honestly, the old lady from weeks before sucked more. After constant knocks and degrading words and slammed doors, it was honestly getting to me way more than it should have. I am, as they say, just a little guy. And I consider myself rather fragile, and sometimes the accumulation can be a poison, and this is what happened here. Close to the end of the field shift, I literally broke down crying on someone's stairs because I was spending hours accomplishing nothing. Eventually, my tear-stricken face was greeted by a confused person, but I couldn't even get my pitch out, so instead they gave me some water so I could clean myself up. Tuesday and Wednesday I was back in the area with the high Hispanic population, which from here on out, for simplicity, I will call H-Town, since we were there the whole time. Got no sales, almost lost my badge, but I didn't. Saw a dead opossum on the sidewalk. I think you can tell this was a forgettable territory when those were the only things I remembered from those 2 days. Thursday and Friday I was in another territory rather close to our office, but I rolled those places as well, a term used for getting no sales in an area, which sometimes isn't even your fault. But at least one guy let me try to fix his television service, and he also let me hang out with his cat. However, there was one house that stood out in this area. It was a large house that was hosting a wedding party, and it could basically be heard from the entire neighborhood, and the organizer was busy, so I couldn't talk to him. But damn, I could have easily made the joke of, you got a lot of people over at this party. Everyone using the internet. The competitor's internet is going to make everyone lag. You need something better. This is where I come in. You can't say I'm an unwelcome guest. However, on that night, I was in a bit of a paradigm. At one point, there was one odd thing I saw on that day, and that was a bunch of helicopters, an interesting sight to see in a place like this. See, on that night, TJ was in my car ride, and so was Q, as well as a few others. TJ had a networking call after the field, and her phone was basically about to die. However, the reason why there were helicopters earlier was because there was literally a shooting at Q's leads. Plus, we were told that you should always pick up leaders first before the entry levels. So the question remains, what do I do? Do I pick up the leader whose phone's about to die and has a networking call later tonight? Or pick up the guy who just witnessed a shooting happen right in front of him and is overcome with constant fear? I chose to pick up Q first because I believe his safety was at risk, and I wanted to get him back somewhere safe as soon as I could. Eventually, Q decided to open up more to me, mostly about how he feels about having me around. But he also mentioned he hated TJ and how she spoke to me. He went on to call her a selfish bitch or something like that, and she acted somewhat self-centered. So to be expected, TJ was mad at me because her phone died by the time I picked her up and got back to the office, and whoever was that lady in those leads who gave me all those chocolate donuts, I really appreciated that a lot. You're an angel. So when Saturday came around, I was sent to different leads in an area with a huge spin of townhouses in a small neighborhood near a road that led to some nearby hiking trails and a nearby national park or something. I don't remember much other than the slight miscommunication on whether we were going to push time or not, since it was a Saturday, and on Saturdays, leaders will tend to push more often, so it'll be less of an inconvenience. The verdict was that leaders like DT in that car ride would decide to push and get an Uber back home when they were done. So another week done, no sales on the board, only a mental breakdown, chocolate donuts, and showing my care to another person's safety at the cost of being scolded by a leader. So I'm going to preface this section by saying that this retrain only happened for one day, as I'll explain later. But it was the basic gist of what the week would convey. As I ended up rolling the whole week, the leadership core realized that something must have been missing with my strategy, and we should have me go back to training until I can get things down. Originally, we decided to have me go out with this one leader who I'll refer to as SJR, who got promoted to leadership around when I joined, but they decided to have me train with JM instead because both SJR and I were drivers, and that only made things ultra confusing with meeting up, scheduling, and that kind of thing. Plus, I already had some experience with training under JM, so we knew each other's chemistry. We went back to the rundown city that I was at before, so some of the people already knew me. Small little sidetrack. I was actually told by SS that between this day and the 4th week, when I was originally here, he was sent to that area and so many people there told him that someone was just there visiting, doing the same thing, and they were actually talking about me because the descriptions that they gave to the person who visited matched my physical description. We still ventured around this area very carefully. What JM mostly did was let me do a lot of the talking for a while, so he could monitor what I should work on when I was talking to the people, and he would chime in if needed. Remember when I mentioned how when I was there originally there was a guy I almost closed but he had to leave to pick up his kids? Well, we went back to his house and closed him. I decided instead to give the sale to JM, but I filled out the order tracker information for him. He promised that he would give me the next sale we got, but unfortunately that didn't happen. There wasn't really much memorable stuff to talk about other than just stopping for ice cream halfway through, because of course we did that. GM said the retrain was a success and I would be ready to go back to going solo the following day. Tuesday, I was back to being solo, taking what JM wanted me to learn and apply to the new strategy. I was in a very open area in a territory near the Townhouse Galore from Labor Day. Not really much happened that day other than a new seat for the worst lead I'd ever had on the job up to that point. Even worse than the first lead from the previous Monday. I somehow found somebody to trump that guy. The conversation with him basically went like this. You'll know why I say what I say. Knock knock. Hello. Man goes to window. I'm not interested. What is it you're not interested in? Do I need to tell you why I'm not interested? Now get off my lawn, you dumbass. At this point I just walked away since this guy, again, is not worth my time. But he still kept going on berating me for walking away, quote, like a f***ing coward. And you have no idea how tempted I was to piss on this man's lawn. I'm kind of representing a multi-million-dollar company, so I can't do that. This man might as well be asking me to commit bestiality with a pig. He was so disgusting. I came back to that territory the following day, and one man couldn't make any decisions without his wife, but at least he let me watch the Lone Ranger with him. Unfortunately, his wife said no, but I really thank that man for the hospitality. I had 2 other people who could have been interested, but one had to talk to his wife, and she didn't speak English, and the other was a young couple who just had a newborn, and they needed to focus on that, which, fair enough, if I'm honest. As you will learn from me talking about my experiences, I am really a realist with this job, and not delusional, and I understand things from others' points of views, which is not what you're supposed to do when you're a door-to-door salesperson, but as I will dive into later, I don't care. That Thursday I got different leads in a small town in between our office and where I grew up, and not much happened other than one encounter. Now, let me get into something before I talk. With these leads, I constantly had a habit of avoiding any sort of cold knocking, or knocking on houses outside of my leads, especially when I already have enough leads given to me automatically. But I had a few exceptions. One point during my first day in these leads, I came across this couple sitting outside their house on their steps, and I decided I'll give them a try. And I talked to them, introduced myself, I was in a particular telecommunications company, and what we offer. They were willing to listen to me, and before I knew it, I was building them an internet package. After a bit of sending links and the like, I signed them up. The risk that came from cold knocking is often getting people who already have our service, but not always. Here, it fit together perfectly like a puzzle, and with that, I was out of the slump and making money again. How ironic that the cold knock was the sale, and the actual leads were not. At least not for me. I finished the area the following day, but didn't make much progress, unfortunately. On that Saturday, I was sent to a nearby apartment complex, the first apartment leads I'd had since the training with TJ, and I managed to sign this guy up within the first hour, although he canceled shortly afterwards, so I didn't get paid for it. Again, his loss. So at least I was able to get through things not in the red, or at least so I thought. This is where things get real bad. I hope you're ready. So, as the title may suggest, this week wasn't a generally positive one, but I'll explain why of all the territories I went to, why this one really was the worst of the worst. But first, let me talk about the first day of the week. That Monday, I literally remembered nothing about the day other than how another girl, JL, put her keys into my glove compartment, and she apparently didn't remember it until I had already gotten home. So as I'm winding down, I get a call from her saying, "Hey, I think my keys are still in your car." And I'm just like, are you kidding me? So I checked my glove compartment, and yup, there it was, still in my glove compartment. So with how late it was, I had to drive all the way back to our office to give her keys, and then drive back home again. Thankfully, JL was nice enough to pay me some money for the hassle. Tuesday. Here we go. Time for the worst territory I've ever had at this stupid job. Basically, it was a small neighborhood that coincidentally bordered a nearby interstate, so it was loud. They mostly consisted of a bunch of townhouses and 2 sets of apartments. My initial plan was to focus on the townhouses on the first day, the first set of apartments the following day, and the second set of apartments the day after. My day started off rather boring, without many answers at all, and since it was right at the end of September, some people already put their Halloween decorations up, and they loved these decorations here. I had a few people who wanted me to go away, but I didn't let it impact me that much. I think in reality, most people weren't even home. I had one house where a kid answered and needed to wait until his dad got home, but his dad said no. I wasn't really getting anywhere, not helped by how spread out the territory was. By the end of the night, I knocked on one of the houses, got a guy on the Ring camera, but I couldn't understand him because, again, this neighborhood is right next to a major interstate, only being separated by some trees. Later, he walked out to what I thought was to confront me for constantly knocking on the door and ringing the bell, but instead he asked me that and how we couldn't hear each other originally. I tried finishing up the last stretch of houses and got to this one lady who had 3 dogs all coming to the door, so I told her, Nightbreaker, nice dogs! But it was very clear she was not listening since she was very blatantly yelling over me and acting like me being there was her biggest inconvenience to her entire existence. I just come up with every single stereotypical bitchy Karen phrase you can come up with. That's basically what she said. When I went to the next house, she stayed at her door and literally started calling the cops. I'm willing to think that the cops arrived after I left because it was time for me to end for the day, and they're like, the person's not here. So that day kind of sucked. But it couldn't get worse from here. Right? Right? Well, for this following day, I went to that first apartment complex and things seemed rather fine, except for the fact that a lot of people were saying I was rather unwelcome in the apartment complex, and I probably just thought they just didn't want to be disturbed. I mean, I guess I can't blame them. For the next 2 hours, this was the case. But it all took a turn for the worse during my second lap of the complex. I saw this old lady coming over where I was, so being the kind person I am, I held the door for her, and she came over and said, "Thank you. Also, you are not allowed to be on these premises doing what you're doing now. I'm going to tell the leasing office to get you out of here." And then instead of coming back to our apartment after a long day of work, she walked back out in the opposite direction, like what was the point of me holding the door then? After I finished the leads in that section, I went outside to play on the playground until suddenly I hear this man's voice holler, "Hey, you!" Which I assumed he was talking to me because there was nobody else around. When I turned my head, the head of the leasing office came out and I was thinking, well, this isn't going to end well. Not delaying the inevitable, I walked up to him and he spoke. He talked about how the old lady was tattling on me and he basically said, "Yeah, we just have a policy that door-to-door people are not allowed here. But I probably take it that you didn't know that. So I don't want to ridicule you for it. I'm just letting you know now. There are other townhouses you can go to instead of here," referring to the townhouses I went the previous day. I told him I didn't even want to be doing this kind of thing, and he gave me his business card and told me to leave. After that happened, I had to leave the area, contacted my CEO, PS, and the admin, and a bunch of other superiors, and had to continue with those stupid townhouses again. Except most of the townhouses I had left were people who never answered, probably were out of town or something like that. But damn, that old lady ruined the whole mood of the territory, and I don't even remember any sort of good people there. And if you're asking, no, I did not go back to the other apartment complex, because that apartment complex was owned by the same leasing office guy. The following day and the day after, I went to a completely different territory, but I didn't really remember much about that territory, other than a man who loved fishing and owed us way too much money. Also a talk with my manager about the big comfy couch, because we had a team night that Thursday and she sat on a big comfy couch, and I remember she said, "I have not heard of that show in a while." That Saturday, I was just near some university houses, but I don't really remember much about that one, so moving on. Now, before I move on to the next week, I will talk about some of the closure about what happened with that worst territory. I ended up having a talk with both my CEO and another lady who managed the leads. And my CEO basically told me, "Yeah, that was awful. You didn't deserve any of that. With that treatment, those people don't even deserve our services." And he told me that he was never cutting leads in that neighborhood ever again. So now, I think you can tell why I call it the worst territory. So at least nobody will have to go through what I had to go through. At the end of the day, good riddance to those people. So now with that out of the way, let's move on. Yes, I had to go on a second retrain this week, but I will get to that. On Monday, I was in the same area as the previous Saturday, and all I remembered was this silly little Halloween house. It's spooky season, folks, so expect me to talk about some of the spooky lawn decorations. That following Tuesday, I was sent to this one small neighborhood a little bit farther north from where I resided, with a bunch of townhouses and the like, I don't really remember much about this area for the most part, but there were some bad apples who made it clear that they were sick of people knocking on their doors trying to get them to switch internet services, which at this point, I can't even blame them. But I just don't like being scolded because of others' actions, but who does? There was, however, one customer here that stuck out to me the most. I won't say the names of the companies, but from what I will say, this guy might as well have had the holy trinity of telecommunication services, and that this guy just doesn't like to pay his bills. This guy literally said, "No, I have service C. I owe way too much money from your service, service A, and I failed to pay my bills with service B, so they terminated my contract. So that's why I'm with service C." Not going to lie, I am really impressed that someone would either be so irresponsible or they just had not been able to win when it came to the service industry. Nevertheless, the day kind of sucked, so moving on. So basically, because of the fact I hadn't gotten any sales since that day in those apartments and my overall numbers were pretty bad, the leaders had made me go on another retrain to see if they could fix the issues. The leader I was put on with the retrain, who I will call TC, was one of the older guys with the company. But he originally had the same leader as PS. He had a very straightforward approach to his door-to-door tactics for his retrain. He often had me watch his actions and pick up on his cues so I could practice them myself. We didn't get any sales, but we had a few interesting customers or close incidents. There was one we could have signed up, but I broke the impulse and asked too many unnecessary questions, losing them. I felt really bad about it when it happened, since it was basically my own fault, but TC told me it was alright and that sometimes I have to learn those incidents the hard way. There was one lady we probably could have signed up, but we ended up not signing her up because she was paying too much for our service originally. Our inference was that this was probably from someone who wanted a big payday and gave no care to the preferences of others, which is a pretty shitty way of going about this business, but you don't need me to tell you that because it's a pretty obvious statement. TC had confidence that I was ready to go back to doing so myself because my student mentality was always strong. So we agreed it was a successful retrain nonetheless. The following Thursday and Friday, I was sent out to this neighborhood that, based on what I was told, had a very huge Jewish population, and I think due to some religious affiliations with their faith, avoid technology at all costs. There might be some information about this, but I dare not to dive into subject matter about other faiths that may come off incorrectly or be extremely incorrect or insensitive. However, just like the retrain I had with JM, there was one day I couldn't help myself and got some ice cream partway through. So to that person who randomly had a cup of eaten chocolate ice cream on their porch trash can, that was me. Eventually on that Friday I got a sale, sorta. Some guy with a medieval knight on his porch came out and he said he wanted our service. And he signed up basically immediately. As I was going through the steps, the guy noticed I was slightly shivering because it was a little colder outside, so he gave me a free hoodie for me to wear, and I still have it to this day. When I signed him up, filled out the order form, and moved on. Also, this guy would later call me back at least 2 more times within the weekend just to chat, so I guess I made a bit of a friend that day. And then, when the techs arrived, his mother turned them away, despite his pleading, so I didn't even get paid for it. But I guess I still got a free hoodie, so whatever. I remember a big issue with this area was that since the town was a little run down, no shop had any open restrooms. By sheer luck, there was a school nearby with a random porta potty that was randomly placed. I went to that porta potty every time I had to pee, and I also think SJR was in the neighborhood next to me, and that's how I ended up learning about how close by the leads can be, even with separate car rides. I also took a picture of a Papa John's coupon at a house that, judging by the house's design and overflowing mailbox, was probably abandoned. Also, I think there was a house with a dead mouse on the porch, so that was unpleasant. So that Saturday I was sent to a different neighborhood a little closer to our office. For convenience purposes, I ended up parking at a nearby garden center and went about my leads there. I don't really remember much about the leads there other than getting yelled at by one guy walking his dog and how he was going to have his dog eat me or something. I later talked to his neighbor and she said, yeah, he's a firefighter. He saves people's lives, yet he keeps saying that to random strangers. I don't understand why he's so aggressive either. It's probably a scare tactic if nothing else. Once I finished that day, I went back to the car and the guy from the garden center went over and told me, hey, I don't like that you parked in our parking lot. Please, next time, go park somewhere else. Which, in my defense, I did technically go into their shop just to use the bathroom. I didn't get any closes, nor did I even finish half of those leads. So the rest of those leads were just kind of sitting there, I guess. Put a pin in that, by the way, because I will come back to this later. And now it's time to talk about the next stretch of weeks, which is honestly the most memorable, and dare I say it, best week of the job. So it takes us as the calm before the storm. So no denying the fact that this week was a weird one to say the least. First of all, to start off on that Monday, I actually didn't drive, so I was getting new leads regardless. And I just remembered it was a terrible day weather-wise, with it basically raining the whole day. But after a lot of back and forth from the street walks, I eventually had one house for the evening, and this guy actually showed some interest, and I signed him up. He also let me use his basement bathroom, and he had some really funny Halloween decorations. Oddly enough, I finished up with him right around the time I needed to be picked up, so who knew the dreariest of the days would end with such relief? And this time, he actually got installed. So I got paid! Yay! The only weird hiccup that came was when I took a picture of the order, I couldn't recognize one of the numbers because there was a raindrop on the tablet screen in the way. But through some blind guessing and asking others what number it looked like, I finished the order. On to Tuesday. I assumed, since I was driving to the field that day, that I would be getting new leads. But what I later found out was that I actually was not given any new leads for the entire day. So what do? The answer? I just had to drive to a specific location, and then JM would just assign random houses nearby to everyone to do for the day. We had to do an entire day's worth of cold knocking. I was assigned in a small area nearby some small townhouses, mostly owned by off-campus living students at a nearby university. Except this area was really small, and I went about it at least 5 times at a slow pace before the day was over. On top of that, some of the houses I was assigned I didn't even get to because JM and 2 other people he was training took those houses from me because they were originally in another apartment complex, but they got kicked out. I didn't get any sales, but I almost closed this one college student, and another had to talk to his roommates before making the decisions. But the train doesn't stop over such a situation. That following Wednesday, I was going through 3 street blocks, and dare I say it, wasn't having the most amount of luck. And then I encountered this one guy who apparently had been doing this style of marketing for the past 30 years. He was basically being a strict judge to me, saying that if you're going to be great at door-to-door sales, you need to have confidence, and I just don't see that in your tonality or your voice. I can tell you're worried. And he probably went on some other preamble about how I wouldn't be the most efficient in the business if I acted like how I was acting, but I guess that was just him trying to let me know that I should work on building my confidence. I also remember this one guy who would have loved to talk more about the product, but he was about to become a father, so instead, I wished him the best of luck. So, guy, if you're out there, congratulations. I hope your fatherhood is going very smoothly. The only other thing I remembered other than that Mexican market I used the restroom at a few times was how there was a house for sale with a sign saying that if you bought the house, you get a free pizza. Unfortunately, I wasn't in the market nor could afford a house at that point. That following Thursday, I was sent to another neighborhood that I remember having some snobbish people. There was one point that stood out to me the most when it came to the snobs though. It was a small area with only a few townhouses. I had 4 leads over there. But before I got to the last one, this one lady who wasn't even one of my leads just kept berating me for being there and started going on and on while I was just thinking, mind your business, woman, I ain't harming you. And the house I did knock next, the woman pulled a be right back, and then she never came back to the door because it had been so long I just didn't want to wait anymore, so I just left. There was one stretch that also seemed rather unsatisfying to get through because it had 2 entrances. One had a no trespassing sign and the other didn't. I came from the side that didn't have the sign, and I swear at least 2 different leads I had over there got extremely butthurt and started accusing me of breaking the no trespassing rule by saying, "Did you not read the no trespassing sign?" And I assumed they were completely unaware of the fact that the sign was only on one side. But I guess they just didn't want door-to-door people around, which is probably why neighborhood surveillance gets so high. You'd be surprised how many of them are scammers. That, and they didn't want random strangers stealing their packages, because that's also a real problem. I'm not even going to underplay that one. I do remember one conversation I had with a woman at one of the houses that acted like a perfect stopping point, and it was just about how I appreciated having someone to talk to and seeing people having fun doing what they love, even when my job is completely deadbeat. At one point, her daughter wanted to play ball with me. I couldn't do it for very long, but it was a fun experience to refill my energy bar if nothing else. Also, one of the houses had a yard sale of artwork, so I got free paintings and wine glasses on beaches. Being someone who studied art and graphic design in college, I see much use for them. When the day ended with nothing, I talked to TJ about the whole situation, specifically that one lady got all butthurt when she wasn't even one of my leads. And I literally told her the only thing that was playing through my head was that Kevin Hart skit where he cusses out his teacher. Luckily, TJ was also finding it rather entertaining, so I wasn't making a fool of myself. I was just hoping things would get better the following day. So that next day came, and I was sent to yet another set of leads. These ones are around the same areas where I had the training with JM. The day seemed rather run-of-the-mill until I came to this house where the babysitter was home, but she had been having some internet problems and wanted to switch providers. So I called up one of the other leaders to make sure I was going through the process flawlessly. I don't remember which leader this was, so I'm not going to be name dropping. It was just nice to get another sale in the records. And then 3 doors later, I closed a second person. 2 sales in the span of less than an hour, which considering my luck, might as well have me being on cloud 9, and I was surely going to relic this achievement. For what I was told, my leader, PS, said that she did a backflip and screamed when it happened. Which is funny to me because, as I mentioned before, she has a really bad leg injury, so she couldn't physically do a backflip. But I love the hyperbole there. So I felt it was worth rewarding myself, so I took myself out to a fun dinner to celebrate. Except not really because the dining room was closed for the evening and I had to get takeout. But I still got to celebrate. To top it all off as well, both of them did get successfully installed with no issues. This moment of satisfaction, and dare to say luck, was probably the highlight of the whole job. It all goes downhill from here. That following day, I was back in that general area, but unfortunately couldn't get any other sales. I was close to this one lady, but it didn't work out because I don't know Spanish very well, and I couldn't translate fast enough. Even then, her husband took care of the bill, and he was not going to be home for a while. Oh well. This was also the last time I got to see DT, since he would leave right after the Saturday due to financial issues and a falling out PN. But let it be known that I helped him get home on the final day of the company. Sometimes I wonder what he's up to. And now, time for the events to sink. So now what was basically the best week I had at the job was behind me. Now to talk about a week that wasn't my worst, but showed that things were starting to diminish. First, I wanted to mention that despite Sunday being my day off, I actually tried to finish some of the other leads from the previous Wednesday's batch, but it didn't really go anywhere before I left and got bored. I also got used to it as an excuse to eat a nearby pizza restaurant. However, there was one thing that happened on that day that I can't not talk about. See, with how the street was set up, it was a very tight street where there was parked cars on each side, making the squeeze even tighter. And then when I was ready to leave, there was a car in front of me in the middle of the road, and it was unloading a bunch of items so I couldn't move forward. The car was showing no signs of moving soon. So what was I to do? I'll tell you how the hell I made it out. I literally had to pull out of where I had parked, drive in reverse, and align myself behind a white line in the street, and hope that there was nobody behind me. Yet somehow, some way, I made it out and drove home. That's not to say I recommend you do what I did, but I had no other choices that made any sort of sense other than just waiting for the car to unload. I had things to do, and I wasn't out of options. So with that Monday, I was sent to a new area farther north from our office, and I don't really remember too much about the area other than the fact that there was another conveniently placed porta potty, and there was one lead that stood out from the rest, where I came across this guy right when he was coming home from work, and I remember having SS on the phone the whole time while I go through the motions, and to our credit, we closed him, but spoiler alert, because we didn't switch his cell phone service as well, he canceled. But to my credit, I did text him about it several times, and he never responded. So what you gonna do? The following day, I was finishing up that general area, but nothing of note really happened. The following Wednesday, I was back in the same general areas half my training days, and I basically went around for 2 streets over and over. And the good news is that I got 2 more sales for the day. The bad news, well, let me explain. The first lady was a resident advisor for a nearby college, and she needed to talk to someone about it, but she still signed up thanks to JM helping me over the phone. The other person, well, I think I just got so godforsakenly lucky I caught this guy when I did, because I think this guy works for the Secret Service or something like that, and he didn't bother to tell me his occupation, and he said he needed a lot of internet for his job, and JM told him that our maximum offers were enough, and he begrudgingly accepted. Since I think he said it would save him money, he took quite a while to finish the last step. So to wait, since I had my car parked in a nearby shopping center, I just put in a dinner order for Jersey Mike's while I waited, so I could pick it up while I was heading to the car. Eventually, he finished, so 2 for the day again. I would later find out that the first lady talked to the other person, and they declined, so she wasn't signed up, and the second guy kept being unavailable for the sign-up, and his appointment just kept getting rescheduled over and over, so I don't even think he got installed at the end of this whole debacle. This was really making my pending orders metrics be all over the place for basically the rest of the time I was at the company. So, now for the Thursday of the week, this might need some other explaining first before I get to it. On that Wednesday, there was a leader in my car ride who was with me, but on this Thursday, he was at some special occasion and he was going to be meeting us. But I guess the communication was just so poor, but I don't blame him considering all the bullcrap that this company was putting me through. Despite this, I was assigned a full car ride with 5 people, the amount of seats available in my car. What I was not told ahead of time was that this leader was going to be meeting us in the field, but he just got his own transportation to the field himself. The day in the field itself wasn't super grand either. No sales, no leads in reality, so it was a whole day of cold knocking again, but what stood out was the shit I had to go through at the end of the day. So as I explained, I had a full car ride of 5 people, and someone else was meeting us in the field, and I had to pick them all up. But how are we going to figure this shit out? There's 6 of us, and 5 seats in the car. Additionally, there was a team night that night at a laser tag arena nearby, and a lot of people were very stoked to get there. However, I was rather unsure if I wanted to go or not. One of the guys was so thrilled to go laser tagging that he sprinted to my car in excitement and literally pushed me to the floor while everyone else got to the car later. Frustrated and hurt, I talked to a nearby police officer about the situation and not boil out my negativity, thinking I was with someone who would hear me out. Eventually, with everyone in the car and having to stuff 6 people in a 5-person car, it was a claustrophobic nightmare, and I was already really cranky, and was one guy in there making everything worse and worse with each passing breath. When we got back to the office, I talked to my manager about the whole thing, and then I just drove home, being too frazzled to go laser tagging. Now, looking back on it, here's what I should have done. What I should have done, and I really wish I did, was after getting knocked to the ground and had everyone at the car, I should have just unlocked the driver's side door and asked them to move and drive to the office all alone, and they were going to have to get to the laser tag arena themselves. Too bad, so sad. Yet, knowing them, they were likely going to try to get in my way and get all on my case for leaving them behind. Not saying that was the right thing to do, but it was something that, according to some of the other leaders, I probably should have done to show that I had control. If that was what would have costed my job, knowing some of the shit I would have to go through later, I guess that probably would have not been as much of a bad thing after all. Petty, yes, but perhaps it showed that I wasn't going to be messed with. So that was a frustrating way to end the day. Now with that frustration out of my system, let's move on. That Friday and Saturday weren't really much to note. I was in the same part of the neighborhood as the neighborhood with the guy with the 3 different services. He never paid his bills. There was one lady who stuck out to me who was a social media podcaster or something like that, but she just wasn't available to talk at any good times. And when I did contact her, she decided she didn't want to continue. There was one other lady I could have signed up, but her daughter paid the bills and she was out of state. I later called her and she said no, so that was the end of that potential sale. And mostly consistent no's and go-aways, and I just didn't feel the neighborhood was rather welcoming.
Sometimes it just gets to you even when you try to tough it out.
So this week proved that the momentum from the previous week was dying. But things won't get worse for the following week, right? Well, kinda. It's time to get to that. And now, it's time to talk about what I believe is one of the most intriguing weeks I had at this job when it comes to doing door-to-door sales. Not just because of the events that played out during the week, but also because of the way in which it would have meant stuff completely differently if it happened in a different part of the time of the job. This week, in a way, was single-handedly one of my worst weeks, while also being one of my best weeks at the same time, which hardly makes any sense. Let me explain. So this first day, Monday, I had a generally normal neighborhood, but it was a very spread out neighborhood if nothing else. Another thing about the people I was getting from this neighborhood is that there was a lot of people who spoke Chinese, which was not something I was expecting. I don't know. I guess finding these language barriers helps me understand the demographics of a neighborhood, so if I encounter more like that, I'll know how to talk to them. There was one lady I got close to closing, but because she only spoke Chinese, it was a little hard for me to understand her. However, without running the risk of doxing myself, I remember late in the day while I was at a house, I got a phone call from my family that apparently an earthquake had hit near the family home, and the news people came to the neighborhood and interviewed one of my family members about it. After that day was done, I turned on the 11 p.m. news and saw that one of our neighbors was interviewed instead. Which, I never thought that would happen. The following day, because of how spread out the neighborhood was, I didn't even finish 2 laps. I decided I would go about the neighborhood one more time. That was the plan. But that's not how it would pan out. I legit only got 2 knocks in before I started walking by this one lady walking her dog, when suddenly, she tries to get my attention. Now, if you have listened this far into the video, you've already picked up on the fact that my track record with women alongside their dogs at this job has not been stellar. To distract her, I tried to pet her dog, but she stopped me and said something along the lines of, "No, you shouldn't pet her. She bites." Also, have you seriously not read the signs plastered all over the neighborhood? Door-to-door sales are strictly prohibited in this neighborhood. I would know a thing or two about that. I'm in charge of the homeowners association. I am going to ask you to leave these premises now. Now, not going to get the cops involved, but also wanting to get around this woman to continue on, I started to make my way around our part of the neighborhood, thinking she would go back to her dog walking and could continue on with what I was doing. But, well, this lady didn't play dumb, and she was following me the whole time, making sure I was gone. Once I left the area, I called TJ because she was the leader in my car ride, and I told her about the situation, and I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was something along the lines of, "Really? I don't have time to hear you complaining about the HOA. Grow up and continue where you are. You've got to act more professionally than that." Which didn't make me feel better. In fact, it only made me feel worse. After I hung up the phone, I called SS, who was TJ's manager, and he instead said, "Yeah, TJ was very much in the wrong to treat you that way. You're not in the wrong here. She is. She's been getting on my nerves lately as well." And then he just went about a more professional way to go about the situation. Also, I actually looked at the neighborhood on Google Maps, and their prohibition signs are tiny. So in fact, I should have told this lady, perhaps you should make the signs a little larger and easier to read, because this is very hard to read. What I did afterwards was knock the houses not in the neighborhood, and while looking for a house that was probably torn down or invalid, I visited a nearby Lutheran church that was where those leads were supposed to be, and had a chat with the pastor. I told him about what happened and how I don't like my job and how he gave me a prayer and wanted to keep in touch with me, and he would give me other job opportunities so I could get out of this mess. After we parted ways, I went back to my car and drove to a different location, where, if you recall, I mentioned when I was talking about the territory with the garden center that I only got to finish up about half those leads. Well, here's why, I said, to put a pin in that. By sheer coincidence, those leads and the leads I just got kicked out of had a street in common, so I just drove 2 blocks to those leads and did the rest of those leads that I didn't get to for the rest of the night. Ironically, I actually got closer to closes in that territory than the one I just got kicked out of. I didn't get any closes, but I did have one woman interested but couldn't make a decision without her husband, and her husband specifically worked late, while another guy said his wife decided it, but I'd wait until she got home, and then when I did get to talk to her, she wasn't comfortable making a final decision until she talked with people in her workplace, and since it was now past when we needed to be finished for the day, I ended there. I would later hear back from her, and she decided to keep her service that she was already using, so whatever. The next day, I was placed in a different area in the same town, and I don't really remember much about this neighborhood, other than how there was no good place to use the bathroom, and also this territory was set up like an E-shape with 3 streets, and it took way too godforsaken long to walk from one end to the other end. However, close to the end of the shift, I ended up coming across this elderly couple who offered me some water and let me inside of their house so we could talk about switching the internet service. However, this was no easy task, and my tablet did glitch out at a few points, rendering me unable to progress at some points. Technology, am I right? What good is the internet of a tablet used for signing people up for new internet when said internet doesn't work? See the irony? It's rather obvious as day. However, they stuck through the whole process and got signed up thanks to contacting our higher up position, and we ended by watching some of the World Series because this was happening around the time. Because it took so long and it was late by the time I finished, I didn't get to finish my rounds and I headed out. At least I was going home on the board, and I thought, I can finish it up tomorrow. This wouldn't happen, spoiler alert. The next 2 days, which were the last 2 days of October, were spent in this apartment complex in a completely different town. There wasn't really much to talk about regarding this apartment complex in general, but I signed up someone on both days. Also, the second day, a guy from the leasing office filed a noise complaint on me, so I spent the rest of the day trying to walk up the stairs as quietly as I could. I almost signed up another person on the second day, but I didn't because they were right about to leave for a Halloween party. Oh well, hope they had fun though. We ended up leaving early because the sun was starting to go down and we didn't want to be blended in with the trick-or-treaters, and also because we had a Halloween party right afterwards. And by Halloween party, I mean a bunch of grown-ass adults dancing the 2000s dance songs for 2 hours. I didn't dance. I only ate more than half of the Kit Kats I bought and had some fake blood smeared on my face. As the month of November started, I was sent out to a different territory that was really close to our office, and I don't really remember much other than a lot of the people saying that I'm not the first person in the area. However, there was one thing that stood out because of how awful I felt about it. See, one of the houses in the neighborhood had their Halloween decorations still up, and they had an orange and black rope across the entrance of their porch to get to the door, held down by 2 statues on each side. However, when I was trying to reach the door to knock on it, I was trying to figure out how I can go over or under the ropes. I legit don't remember which I did, but nevertheless, I tripped over the ropes, causing them to come undone from one of the statues, causing it to fall off the podium, onto the porch and stairs, and caused a part of it to break. Specifically, the statue was of a small bird, and because I tripped on the rope, when it hit the ground and the stairs, the beak came off. Not knowing what to do to cover myself up, I just put the beakless bird statue on a chair on the porch, and then instead of knocking on the door, I immediately ran away from the house in embarrassment. I later saw them remove the bird statue from the porch and remove the ropes a few hours later. And I couldn't even look at their house because of my shame. And now I am telling all of YouTube about it! Because who doesn't love listening to other silly misfortunes on YouTube? Starting off this week, I had my first instance where my leads were actually the exact same as ones I had in the past. Specifically the same leads as Labor Day, aka the day TJ forced me to work an extra hour and a half because she wanted to. Except there were no cookouts, and also I knew how to strike up a conversation, or at least talk to people. I did have one person who recognized me from the previous visit, and they told me I'm still not interested in the product, just like I said 9 weeks ago. I also think I watched Shrek through their window, but that part might not be accurate. I mean, all things considered, I did do better this time than the previous time, despite getting no sales. It just wasn't a super memorable day overall. The closest I got was a guy who was about to move, but our service wasn't available in his new home, so we couldn't really do anything about that. It is what it is. The following day was an interesting one. See, on this day, before I was getting cut my own leads, I had to drop some people off at an event in a downtown area, and then I would be cutting my leads. After stopping at a Royal Farms and dropping the people off, I was mostly assigned with driving myself to the leads, only for them to not be cut when I arrived, so I had to wait for them to be cut, which happened a lot and is a big pain in the ass every time. When I finally did get my leads, I was sent out on 2 blocks a little out of the way from the city outskirts, and within only the second knock, I was greeted by this couple who were watching a soccer game, and they showed a lot of interest in wanting to switch to our service, since it was still rather new in the area and they were having a family gathering. Except, here's the thing. For some reason in this area, I was running into an issue where the packages we were building for the customers were old, outdated, and didn't run properly. And what we learned several times in the office part of the job was that when we get issues like this, it gives more time for the person to say no. Luckily, these people were pretty patient with me, and later on, when it was found that we couldn't sign them up without proper approval of the daughter, who was at work, I just signed up one guy who lived a little further down the street. However, he had no choice but to cancel because he decided to pay for it with a credit card, which you can't do, and he wouldn't have had it any other way. So he wasn't really a great customer, but sometimes it's just the way things go. I got a sale, but at what cost? The rest of the day wasn't super eventful. I came back to the area for one more day, but there were no sales, but I did have a woman who was interested. She said she would contact me once she'd finally made a decision with her husband, and then she never told me. So the next day, I once again had to wait 1,000 millennia for my leads. I ended up in another area semi-near where I trained with DT and ES. Except for this first day, we had something a little bit different happen. See, for this one day, our CEO was having us go on a bit of a challenge where if we did a plethora of different things throughout the day, we would get points, and whoever got the most points would get a prize. The rules were put in our GroupMe page. Some of the stuff includes stuff like,
Take a picture of something that connects to the internet.
take a picture of a house you had a fun conversation with, send a motivational message in the chat, stuff like that. So finally, I had more work cut out for me. Forget focusing on just trying to get sales or whatever. I wanted to get these points and maybe boost the others in the company. That's more the person I really want to be. Not a door-to-door salesperson. I'm good at keeping people engaged more than selling them. I want to be myself, not someone judged for their outfit.
Nonetheless, I spend a lot of the time just taking pictures and sending messages.
Although there was one that required me to get a sale, which I wasn't having the most amount of luck with, unfortunately. Or so I thought, until out of nowhere, I knock on this woman's door, and she had recently gotten off her shift at a hospital, and she mentioned that every so often, her sons would come home from college and complain about the Wi-Fi going out, and she hoped that I could combat it.
But after a lot of discussion and cups of cold water in order to quench my thirst,
I got her signed up without any issues, and therefore was able to get even more points. I'm not sure if I won the whole thing, but I remember SJR was getting very cocky and adamant that she won it, so if there even was a prize, I'm not even sure if I even won anything, or even if she won anything. So what was the whole point of that? Pride? Bragging rights? Nothing more than that, likely. Whatever. I came back to that territory for one more day, but I didn't really get that far, but I did have KW come by at a few points and help me out. What a friend. I also remember this one house that had a sign that said, "No solicitation on my lawn. That means you, company I work door to door for. I don't care what you say." And I wasn't even offended. Quite the opposite, actually. I think when I came to his door and said something along the lines of, "I guess you get us a lot and you're just sick of us, so I'm not even gonna say my whole pitch or whatever. I'm just going to hope that you are having a good day and have fun with your game." The guy wasn't even offended. I think I just left him alone for the rest of the day. That Saturday was not a super memorable one either. No sales, not much, except for one conversation I had with a woman. See, if you haven't picked up on it, I really hate this job and I really wanted to do everything to get out of the job. And she noticed I was feeling down, noticed I wasn't giving salesperson attributes. Like, I didn't want to be a salesperson, and I did tell them the truth, and it somehow escalated to getting me to apply with some nearby wine shop, which is ironic because I don't drink alcohol. But I still wanted to give it a try. So thank you, random woman I met on that random Saturday about giving me a job to apply to. And now, on to the rest of the month, the schedule that I believe most unforgivable. So strap in, everyone. We're going through this horrible ride together. If I'm honest, that title probably makes things sound much better than they actually were. But trust me, this goes downhill fast, so be prepared. The first day wasn't really all that memorable, all things considered. Rather run-of-the-mill, if I'm honest. It was like the neighborhood where I got kicked out by the homeowners association, only I didn't this time. The only thing I remembered was it was a very cold day, and I don't think I was properly equipped with the right types of layers, and other people were in the same boat as me, and in response, our CEO basically pulled the whole, "Well, if you're just going to complain about the cold like this, I hate to say it, but perhaps you should start looking for a new job. I can start writing cover letters now." Which I didn't really see as a bad thing, because what I've been saying for the past, I don't even know how many minutes we're at this point. I'm currently almost 2 hours into recording this. As indicated, this job was very, very shitty. Perhaps getting out of it would only do me more good than bad. The following day, I was sent to a different territory that was mostly just a series of townhouses. But wait, I need to mention what happened first. Before I left, I got a phone call from a number I didn't completely recognize, but I figured it might be something, which I know sounds like a red flag, but hear me out. I did call them back to see who it was, and it just so happened to be the guy from that one territory from 4 weeks earlier who had to talk to his roommates, and then decided to switch over. Also, now that university student from that territory that I almost signed up, he got signed up by D. But back to this guy. He told me exactly what he wanted from us, and in order to get the assistant, I called D as well, and she was able to help me get through the motions. Before I knew it, he was closed, and I got my first blood. It was the first sale of the day from the company. Now, keep in mind, I haven't even knocked any doors yet, so do with this information what you will. A sale before the first knock? Impressive if you ask me. I didn't really get the most amount of luck with my actual territory, ironically though, but it was what it was. The next day, I actually had my first day on the job where I didn't go in because I had a dentist appointment, and instead of going into the field afterwards, I decided instead to let my mouth recover, and also got a haircut and hung out with the rest of my family because I had gotten almost no chances to do that ever since I started this job. Plus, I could afford to take a day. With that one day away, I continued the next 2 days in an area near H-Town, but unfortunately got a citation in the process. Kind of ruined my mood originally. I didn't get any sales either, but I did get close to 2 points. One girl had a major payment coming in, probably wouldn't have been able to afford our service at the moment, and one guy wanted the TV service but not the internet, which unfortunately we couldn't do despite our best efforts to give him the best deal we could. Nothing either me or SS could do could persuade him. It was just a big mess. But it wasn't as bad as that one woman from when I started going solo. It didn't help that I also got slightly sick during this whole ordeal. Which, getting sick and door-to-door sales is an awful combo, especially since you don't know
when you're going to interact with people with weakened immune systems,
who likely can't even fight off these illnesses. Towards the end of it, I had another one of those instances where I knocked on a door, got no answer, so I walked off, and he chased me down to ask why, but he wasn't really aggressive about it per se. That final day of the week, I spent in a different territory. I signed up another college student, but that's basically it. By the end of it, one of the leaders, TC, to be specific, asked me to take him to Goodwill so that he could buy dress pants because the next day was our next quad annual regional conference in Philadelphia. So onward to next week. As I mentioned, the Sunday of this week was a conference day, so we didn't really get the day to relax or whatever since these conferences are required after all. Also, we're not even getting compensated financially for these. Another red flag with this company. They have this whole thing as a networking event to meet new people and the like, which, as I mentioned, introvert's worst nightmare, and it's very forced. A lot of other introverts can really agree with this. So as the title suggests for the week, I never had a single day in the week where I was in the same territory for more than a single day. And I will say this
is one of the weeks I remember the most fondly because of the contrast of the different territories I was put in and the situations that came.
Let's start with Monday, shall we?
The Monday territory was in a town that was a little bit farther west from our office,
with a bunch of Middle Ages sounding street names. I wasn't the driver for this territory, but rather, someone else was, and our leader was someone who I will refer to as AH.
I wasn't really getting the best amount of luck with this apartment complex.
Mostly because there were a lot of language barriers, and it was a wide plethora of languages. Talk about finding where there's quite a bit of diversity. However, the thing that stood out to me in this territory is probably what you'd expect. But knowing me, this really shouldn't come as a surprise. See, this apartment complex just happened to be right next to a shopping center with a grocery store that I went to a few times to use the bathroom. Love the convenience. But that wasn't all. See, in this territory, there was a sticker sheet dispenser where if you spend 50 cents, you can twist a little mechanism and you get a random sticker sheet based on a specific topic, and one of them was Vocaloid themed, which instantly caught my attention. Unfortunately, I had no quarters with me, so I couldn't get any of these sticker sheets. Though, this is where things get very serious. After the sun went down, I got a call from PS with some shaky news. What I was unaware of is that throughout the day, AH was constantly checking his phone and was very silent, until later, he picked up the phone and broke down in tears, to the point where the other driver had to drive him back to the office. My heart continued to sink when I found out the story.
He basically was going about the day realizing that one of his family members was in a major accident.
And he got the call that the family member did not survive the accident. At the end of the day, my manager checked back with me to make sure I was still able to get through the day despite the situation that I was suddenly placed in. The next day, I was sent off to a different apartment complex that was farther away, and I actually got better luck with this one despite a lady trying to kick me out. I just walked in a circle around the complex and then continued, and she never noticed for the rest of the day. I kid you not,
I even gained 20 minutes into the territory.
I got called for tech support to fix the guy's TV because he couldn't turn off the AI voice filter, and I had to fiddle around with his settings until I got it to work. Eventually, when the day was almost over, I had 7 different appointments with people to potentially sign up, and how many did I come out with? 1.
Which is debatably better than none.
So I don't think I have a right to complain in the process. I went to call SS and accidentally called my sister, so that was awkward for sure. It legit took me a split second to realize what I had done, but the guy wasn't dropping impulse from it, and he was signed up at the end of it all. I picked up the only other person in my car ride after he had a horrible day in his territory, since I heard he was placed in a territory with a bunch of racist snobs who treated him like shit. Hopefully, I won't have to go in that territory in the future, right? This might be foreshadowing. The next day, I was putting in this new territory where most of my leads were townhouses that were under the specific realty service that gives them amenities, and one of their amenities by sheer coincidence is their internet. And what do you know? It's our biggest competitor that they have, so they can't get rid of it. However, I did find this one guy who absolutely hated the service and wanted ours, but was stuck with it. I would later learn later he was able to switch to our service, assuming that the amenities are all part of this bundle and the internet is just something included. I wish I would have known that, so I still would have been able to close him, but unfortunately it's kind of too late to try to fix those issues. Oh well. Needless to say, I didn't get anything that day. On to the next day, which I want to start off with some context. See, in all the different areas where we've had leads, this one was one for some reason significantly farther than all the rest of the areas. And to factor in some time, we often would have people in those leads who leave early from the office so that they'd have enough time to get to those leads and not have an unfair disadvantage compared to the rest of us. There might be a chance you understand what I'm about to say next. It was my turn to head into that area, and I was given some interesting leads there. Let me explain. When I was put into these leads, I was placed in a downtown part of the town/city, so most of my leads were actually leads that technically didn't exist or couldn't have access in the first place. A common thing that happened was it saying there were several apartments when in reality, they were just random ruins of a business, because you would be surprised how many businesses ended up on my leads. Which is basically a way of saying that whoever cut these leads shouldn't have cut me there at all. But despite that stupidity, I honestly loved these leads. Just not for my job, but if I was just there to go shopping, I would be having the time of my life. I stopped by a few shops, but I didn't purchase anything. That's not what I'm here to do, despite it. However, I still promised to try this one hot dog place one of these days. Even though it has been over half a year, I will do it. I know I will. Now, the following day, since I had so many ghost leads, and I had basically used everything up, I was able to put down in our leads log, since that's now a thing, that I needed new leads, except nobody else from the car ride did, and it led to a whole other debacle. See, I needed new leads, but they decided that all of our car rides would have the same people, except also they wanted one of the people in training to train with this specific other leader. They also wanted this leader also be in the car ride, but this person's car can only fit 5 people, and that makes 6 people. Do you see the problem? I was the one removed from the car ride, and because I literally couldn't be put in any other car ride due to time constraints, I was just told to drive alone, which is something they often discouraged, but what choices did I have? Really goes to show how organized the people at this job are. Also, where the hell was the leads log when I needed it 6 to 7 weeks ago? I ended up getting some leads only a few minutes from my house, so I didn't even bother driving back to the office since I had all my stuff with me already. The leads weren't really much at all. I had people interested but owed money because sometimes people just have problems with their credit, just the way. The next day I was sent back to the same area as that Thursday, but it was a regular neighborhood, and it was way too used up, and I got nowhere. Except getting yelled at by this one really impatient lady, and the neighbor's just like, sorry that happened to you, we don't like her either. By this point, I was more talking about my personal projects with strangers as a way of ambiguously saying I hate my job, and I would rather be writing a book. That's another way of saying I just don't care. Another issue was that in this faraway town, so many people have a slightly lower quality version of our service, but they acted like it was the best thing since sliced bread, and I guess I'm just not great at persuading people to learn the truth, but it didn't align with their biased reality. So why the hell am I even still at this job? When I got picked up, our driver almost crashed the car and spent more than half the car ride speeding. It's like the guy from the first week of the job. I didn't feel safe, but who would? Whatever. Now this is where things really sink deep. So first of all, the next day, despite being a Sunday, was a required work day for everyone because we were not working the following Thursday because it was Thanksgiving. And this was to make up for it or some shit like that. There's basically no room for a recharge, all things considered. So with having to work on a Sunday, I think we were still getting paid double, but my lead situation was such a godforsaken mess that it felt like it wasn't even worth it. See, I was cut leads in one location, and everyone else was cut leads in a different location. So we had to find a compromise. So here's what we decided on. We would drive to where the others had their leads, and I just used the closest set of leads I had available, which just so happened to be the same as those townhouses with the amenity fees. Mostly the ones that weren't even townhouses. But the issues were that most of those leads were either businesses that were closed, or nobody was home. Or, in the case of one guy, I'm not talking to you right now. I am watching the football game. I didn't really get anywhere, and it was clear I would rather have been doing anything else. Then, I think our CEO was punishing the leaders in some way because one of the leaders, specifically TN, made a joke about the CEO's NFL team losing at the last second after they had a 3-score lead. I know I'm mentioning so many weird names, but I also will mention that alongside DT, JM is also gone from the company. So, because of that, I'm not going to be referring to them anymore. Things weren't great, but, we have made it. Pause the music. Now, I have reached what was the day that really shook the whole job on its head for me. Monday, November 24th. As I have mentioned way too many times in this video, this job sucks, and I didn't like working it. Plus, the pay situation was such a travesty, and it only added salt to the gaping wound. When I woke up that morning, my mind was just playing that one Team Star Kid clip over and over again with the people singing, "I don't really want to do the work today. I don't really want to do the work today." Playing in my head over and over again. That's just how I felt. If you've listened this far into the video, maybe this gives you a little more of a perspective of how life is for someone doing a dead-end door-to-door job. This day, however, was one that stuck out to me. When I was finally put in my car ride, which was with JL, KW, and TC, I ended up hearing some drama that had happened between the leaders. From what I was able to eye on KW's phone, ES was posting messages in rage that she had lost all her respect for our CEO, and was basically quitting the job on the spot like the selfish, entitled brat she was. When I was dropped off, I remember the first knock was a man in a wheelchair who didn't immediately answer, but he basically set the stage for the area in a way. I was going to be in a heavily worked out area, but perhaps people can react differently. After all, in one of my very first weeks, I had a guy say I was very approachable compared to a lot of the people who came before, so maybe there was hope. I had a few chats with some older people, and they told me some people who might be of help and what I should expect for the area. The thing about when people are uninterested, whoever gets the leads next gets them again, so despite the previous no, the person who comes next doesn't know about those responses, and they get the frustrating brunt of a result. Which, considering some of the stuff I have said, you may pick up that such may have happened a few times already. Eventually, I got one lady who I got so badly scolded by, and my first thought was that I'd probably just caught her in a bad mood. But you might be thinking, why is this getting labeled so badly? Well, you'll see. Lots of no's and no answers later, it all started to get to me about how much I want to get out of this hellhole. Everyone sucks. I suck at this job if I'm not getting anywhere. KW says this area is easy. The demons are speaking. It didn't help that I got a notification that one of my subscriptions increased by $11 a month. My mind was still racing about the situation, but ES and SJR was also part of it. And both of them left as a result of it. So no, I'm not going to be talking about them anymore. Makes me think, going about your job with that tension, not a good thing. Everything was just starting to unravel, one by one, to the point where I was losing it. It didn't help that JL, KW, and TC were getting a lot of success where they were, and I was getting nothing. What am I doing wrong? Something. Why am I feeling this way? Why? The hours kept passing by, my list getting smaller and smaller. I couldn't handle the stress anymore. After way too long, the sun came down, and I still tried to knock on some other doors in desperation and devastation. Nothing. Nobody to hear me out. Nobody to help me out. I felt isolated. I had nobody to turn to. I hadn't felt this way before. It was a pain worse than the incident 2 months ago. I still tried doing what I could, which half of it was just knocking on the doors of businesses that I knew were closed. Those hellos turned into hellos, while the tears ran down my face. Also, at one point, I had to pee so bad that I immediately ran into a pizza restaurant when I saw a restroom sign, only to learn later it was an employees only area. I already made a story time short about that one. Not my finest moment at all. Eventually, it got to the point where I was just waiting to get picked up. I had accepted defeat, and in my despair, I called my mother just so I could not feel like I was alone anymore. In my sobs, I talked about how much I wanted to get out of this whole paradigm and how I felt so alone. I believe my mother was devastated and she realized it was this bad. Before long, I got a call from Tisei about where I was. I told him where I was, which was a bus stop near a grocery store, and I was picked up when they finally arrived through my sniffles. The whole car ride, I put my hood up and pressed my head towards the window in JL's car. Neither JL, AW, nor TC bothered to talk to me, but the girl who was in training offered me some Cheez-Its for me to munch. I could only give out a weak thanks, since even with how miserable I am in this moment, I can at least verbally express even the smallest gratitude. Even when we got back to the office, I told Dee that I wanted some time alone once the day was broken down. And afterwards, I just broke down in front of her. I told her that something was getting to me and I don't know what I should do for the sake. I'll break down all the factors. First of all, I was in a bad mindset for the start of the day, since we often preach the importance of having a positive attitude, leading to a positive day, same with negativity. And I started my day with a negative mindset. Again, the Team Star Kid clip of, I don't want to do the work today. Then I was taking the rejection, which honestly was natural for the door-to-door sales, too personally, like an attack. I shouldn't have done that. Plus, I was entering a very negative atmosphere with the conflicts with the leadership core. The 3 other leaders were completely unaware that I saw those messages in the first place. The other 3 leaders all got at least 2 sales in the area, and one other gloated about how easy it was to close people in the area, making me more envious. My mood was also damaged by the $11 subscription increase that I wasn't expecting. Plus, I was probably still upset about the Sunday I had to work, and the fact that we have been so on the go for so many days in a row with no rest, because I'm also factoring in the conference day. Again, no time to recharge. I believe all of that just all became this huge cloud of stress that just exploded amongst me, and my brain interpreted it all poorly. Not wanting to get my envy to ruin my tomorrow, and also watching parts of the recent Jaden Animations video, I dropped the idea of taking a mental health day the next day, so I could get all this shit all in order, and give myself the recharge I so desperately needed. We always say negative energy is contagious, just like positive energy. I don't want to spread that negative energy. We've had too many people at this company do that, and I don't want to be one of them. I know better than that. When I had mentioned it to her, she didn't skip a beat and said, I think you should. In fact, I will tell everyone that you will. You deserve one, especially after the state you're in right now. Shortly afterwards, I left the office, and then, when I got home, I didn't set my alarm. I needed a mental health day, and I wanted to make sure I was putting it to good use. A day to regroup, refresh, recharge for the right of the day. I couldn't come back in after a day like I had had. It just wasn't healthy. I believe more jobs should allow their employees to do that. I did it because it was what would benefit me most, and someone agreed that I needed it. I still looked at the group me and whatever, but I was giving myself time to refuel in a way that was beneficial for me, which is what I needed. The day afterwards, I was ready to get back to 100%. This first day after the mental health day, I was nearby the Leeds. I was in early October with the sweet Halloween decorations. Except, here's the thing about areas like this. They're just not memorable. A lot of these people are probably just expecting us to arrive every so often, and those who actually want our service have us most likely. So it just comes down to who can close them and who can't. There was only one person that stood out, and it was a guy who was very selfish. As in, he didn't care about anything his children wanted, only cared about what he wanted, even when the children were saying that things were wrong. Because when I knocked at first, the kid answered and said, "Yeah, our internet sucks. My father or grandfather deals with it. I forgot which one." And when I came back there, he basically said, "I'm not changing anything." And when I brought up how his son or grandson said it was that bad, he literally said, "Well, I don't care about what he says. He doesn't pay the bills." So needless to say, not a quality customer. That's just how it is. The following day was Thanksgiving, so I was off and we were back in the groove that Friday. Let's be honest, if you're keeping track, which I don't think anyone is, even if it wasn't for the dentist appointment and the mental health day, and you classify the conference as a work day, we would have not had a day to recharge since the day after the wine lady, but before the day the CEO sent the message about leaving because of the cold. Also, by the way, I did actually have an interview with the wine place in that period of time, but they said no. This next area was only a few blocks away from the wine lady, actually, and it was just 2 blocks over and over, and it was, dare I say, kind of boring. But one of my first knocks was a guy who was interested, but he wanted to wait until after Christmas to do anything about it. Also, my tablet wasn't working, because here's a tip. Don't have someone put your tablet on the rim of a non-air-conditioned black car on a sunny day. Just don't do that. I was back in that area for the following day, but I did not get any sales. But rather, one old guy proceeded to share his entire life story with me, and probably had spent like 20 minutes talking to me about his role as a journalist for the press, and some of his artistic abilities and the like. I think this man was just really lonely and he wanted somebody to talk to, and his entire porch was filled with a lot of subliminal messages that he would explain to me, and he gave me an index card with an illustration of me and some strange ass message. I still have that index card somewhere, but I don't remember what exactly it says. I also found out one of the other people in the car ride was apparently watching me in the middle of this nonsense, and the whole time he thought I was about to close him. But no, he was just wanting to talk to me because he was lonely and he had a lot to say. In a way, I helped him out a lot, but he didn't want the service because he was very old school. I mean, if I can't sell you, at least I can be your friend. I don't see it as a complete loss, I suppose. Anyway, now on to December. As that title may be hinting at, comparatively, this was actually one of my most important weeks of my entire time at this job, because of what I did this week. But first, here's some context coming into this week. Prior to this part of the job, we suddenly had a lot of leaders leaving. I already mentioned people like JM, ES, and SJR leaving, but also D was leaving because she was getting promoted to run her own branch, and we needed more quantities of leaders to become stronger and fill in those gaps. I was technically at the point where I had everything to get myself a promotion into the leadership position when it came to the sales. Since it was just 3 sales in a row for a week, I was in. Now what does that mean? It meant I got to lead my own team, I would be able to interview people into the job. It also meant that I would be able to train people, which I'm just going to spoil, I never did that during my entire time at the job. Of all those things I mentioned, the only thing I did was interview people. Now, let's start with the first day. The first day, I was sent out to the same town as the downtown stroll, and that hell neighbor that was so far away, except I had to drive there myself. The area I was in was near the downtown area, but I had enough leads that made it eligible. I wasn't having the best of luck at one point until a little accident happened. So I was checking some messages right before I started my 3rd lap, when suddenly I hear a man's voice come from a nearby door, and before I know it, the guy in the house I was standing in front of called me over and wondered why I was standing in front of his house on a security camera. Eventually, I introduced myself and why I was there, and he said, "Oh, provider I work for is in the neighborhood now? I've been waiting so long." I told him, yes, it is now available in the neighborhood. The guy mentioned that he had been stuck using the other provider because ours wasn't available for the longest time. But since I was there to tell him that it was now available, he was instantly sold. There were no major bumps in the road. I got KW on the other end to help me out, and before I knew it, he was signed up. And he was as happy as can be, like a clam. Like clams can even feel happiness. Why did that expression go that way? It's not important. So, something I did notice was how I forgot the E or W in his street address, but luckily the installation text found which address was the correct address. The next day, I had quite possibly one of my most interesting yet also kind of fun days with the job. Let me set the stage. I was assigned to do my rounds in this huge apartment complex, but only a quarter of it. The other 3/4 were given by the other 3 SOPL representatives or leaders in my car ride. Also, this entire apartment complex was under the same company as the townhouses with the amenity fees. But this time, SS told us the way to deal with these people, and specifically asked what they're using their internet for. If they're using their internet for something like gaming or working from home, which uses a lot of internet, push it on them. If not, don't bother. I don't really remember much about the area other than the conveniently placed McDonald's that was down the street. All the action happens in the last knock. So I knock on this woman's door and she answers. I give my whole spiel and she lets me in. I remove my boots and take a seat on her couch and discuss the product and how it is superior than the cheap internet that the apartment complex wants her to have. And since she has a lot of young kids who are probably all using the internet all at once, she can't afford to have her children all complaining. Eventually, because it was time for us to go, I called up SS and told him which apartment I was in so he could meet me there, and explain things I may have failed to explain well, since again, I am imperfect and sometimes stumble over my words. My stories in history videos sometimes have a lot of outtakes, so I may have a blooper reel in the future, since especially the older ones have quite a lot of funny outtakes. When SS and the guy he was training had arrived, he started assisting me in the rest of the clothes, with the trust building even more. Since it was basically the end of the day, I got the other 2 people in our car to meet up with me and SS. And then we would all go to the car together. And by together, I mean I took a picture with them all together, and then gave them my keys and told them I would meet them there. I mean, that sounds like a bad idea, but I had their trust and they had mine. With 2 sales, 2 days in a row, I just needed one more to secure myself a leadership position. The next day, I had a conveniently placed McDonald's nearby and I walked just 2 to 3 street blocks over and over for hours at a time, hoping to get a sale. Eventually I stumbled across this old man who was someone who was such a headache that it almost seemed impressive. See, this man wanted the TV with the company as long as he could continue with his phone service. And I told him, yes, he could switch over his phone service too, but for some strange reason he was just like, where's the nearest store? Which he had to repeat several times because of his accent. The guy was just not getting the memo that I could just use my tablet to get him a new phone and save him a lot of fees that would likely have been effective if he just kept asking what the nearest store was, even with me constantly having to tell him, sir, the best part about me being here is that I can sign you up for the new phone with just my tablet so you don't have to go to the phone store to get it, and I can save you so much money. But the guy just kept pushing over and over and getting the address of the nearest phone store, showing that this guy probably isn't going to listen to a single word I say. To try to break things down, I told him I could sign him up for the internet first, and then once that was done, we could worry about the phone. However, later on, he would tell me that his wife handled that, and she wasn't going to be home until later that evening. I did also tell him about how, if you buy one, you can save money by bundling it with another, and he clearly was not listening to a single word I was saying about signing him up using my tablet. I just got up and left and mentioned I would come back later, for my sanity, and to get my mind off the annoyance. The rest of the day wasn't super memorable, except for one other house that was also interested, but they said come back later, that I could close them. When I came back, they didn't respond, so I left them a sorry we missed you note. I also came back to the old man's house once the sun came down, and neither him nor his wife responded, assuming they'd hit the hay, so that didn't go anywhere. Also, I think in this territory there was also a person who got mad at me because when I was talking to them, they were in the middle of cooking, and because they got distracted, they ended up burning their food and blamed it on me. Nevertheless, no sales that day, so my streak came to an end. I was almost thinking that even if I got another sale this week, I wouldn't get the promotion since it wasn't 3 days in a row. The next day wasn't anything too spectacular, just went back to that rundown city area. Almost had some people signed up, but I called them in a bad time, and so it was only just an exchange of numbers. And they said they would call me back when they were ready, but only one responded and they just got too busy and it never went anywhere. The following day, which was a Friday, I was sent to a different area that was very spacious, but I eventually did come across this man who was interested. He also had a very big dog. He was signed up without much issue, and I would later learn that even if it took a few weeks, that sale was enough to get me promoted. Apparently they were able to look past the fact that 3 sales of the week weren't 3 days in a row because I'd shown such good etiquette at the office, which I almost never talked about because that's not what the Stories and History video is about. When the day finished up, I left to go to Dee's farewell party, and the last day, I came back to that territory, but I didn't really get a close, but nothing inherently bad happened either. So now this is where things fall back down to earth. Who would have known that one of the better weeks of this job we followed up with one of the worst? And not gonna lie, if it wasn't for that leadership promotion from the previous week, this might have been the week that sent me over the edge and got me the hell out. This week sucked real bad. But why? Well, let me break it down. Well, first I went back to that apartment complex with the nearby grocery store with the Vocaloid stickers after doing Christmas shopping, but I got nowhere. Again, people probably don't want to be bothered on the weekend, and even then, as I mentioned when I talked about these leads, most of the people didn't speak English at all, so the language barrier was still in effect. The Monday of that week, I was sent to that same territory where I had that conversation about the big comfy couch, except I didn't really get anywhere. But I did later talk to the fisherman guy again, but he didn't want the service at all in all. However, later, a few hours into my lapse, I suddenly noticed a police car pull up to my area and he called me over. Later found out that someone nearby to the area had noticed me suddenly relieve myself in an area that I thought was hidden, but it wasn't. They felt it looked suspicious, so they reported me for it. When the police officer arrived, they asked me to give some accounts of who I was and why I arrived. I didn't refuse anything. I told them it was me and perhaps I did something I shouldn't have. I was identified since their description matched my appearance, and they just said, "You're not in legal trouble. Just here's what you should have done." Since all the places required crossing an entire highway, and even then I was in an area with a lot of places that locked their bathrooms because of people doing questionable things in there, and just a general statement of, just don't do that again. So just don't be stupid anymore. Did I understand that part right? And he was just like, basically, yeah, and he left. I think I just skipped that area for the rest of the day and then talked to my CEO, and he said he was going to back me up so that things wouldn't get worse. Even then, people at this company have done significantly worse things. I guess my solutions after the September incident came back to bite me in the ass. The phenomenon that I failed to remember was something that in our business we call the fishbowl theory. What the fishbowl theory consists of is how we should be in the mindset that anyone can be watching you during your shift wherever you are, which with that shouldn't be confused with 1984. However, the example of the fishbowl theory that my CEO touched upon is one that I will never forget because of how crazy and out of left field it sounds. What he said was, you need to get into the mindset that anyone can see what you're doing when you're out and about in your leads. So you can't just drive up to a stranger's house and then drop someone off while blurring NBA Youngboy. That's not me because I don't listen to that kind of thing, but other people in my company do, and I'm just going off what my CEO said. Needless to say, at the end of that day, I was worried sick and just needed to disappear, so I forced myself to get new leads the following day. That following day, I was sent to a completely different area with a huge neighborhood setting, and I got nowhere fast. Not a great territory, shunning, people don't want to listen, hard to keep a conversation with anyone, people believing inferiority is superiority, that kind of thing. The closest I got was this Spanish lady, but I caught her at a very bad time. Also, for some reason, this neighborhood had a lot of specific types of leads that were labeled as greenfield, and they were mostly invalid leads, some of which literally were greenfield. I think I asked what they meant, but it hardly made any sort of sense, and they just seemed like a waste of space. However, there were also these two leads that I will phrase like this. If I had a nickel for every time I had a lead in this territory that I stopped by right when they changed from one company to another, I would have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice. And even weirder that it was 4 different companies. Surely after such a messy territory where nothing happened, it would get better from here, right? Well, the short answer is no. But before then, I will talk about the worst thing about the day. See, at the end of the day, we always need to get our days broken down, and one of the parts is talking about what we did well and what we didn't do well. Specifically, 3 of the former and 2 of the latter. On this day, on the other hand, PS gave me 1 positive and 5 negatives. Quite an imbalance, and it makes me wonder, how are you supposed to help me grow as an asset of the company when you're diving so much into negativity? That doesn't build people, it breaks them. Anyway, this territory was actually the same one I had on that day when I went to those townhouses on that Sunday. By sheer coincidence, these leads were in the same town, and they were in a very far-off area. However, when I visited this area, I felt like I needed to talk to these people in a particular way. Judging from just the house design and how far they were, I assumed, yeah, these people probably have a lot of money. They don't want to be with some lowly company that's low quality and is shared with everyone who has the service, am I right? Well, actually, these people just acted like I was inferior, for lack of better terms. I got a few people to talk about it with, but they didn't really go anywhere. The thing about this territory is that it has one street that goes around in a circle and is basically a giant no-outlet neighborhood, and it took so long to walk the whole distance. By the first day, people had caught wind to what was going on, and one snotty asshat had a new goal in mind. Have me gone. This guy was one of those, if I see you in my neighborhood, I'm calling the cops, you're not welcome here. You know, his attitude isn't welcome here. Where are your manners, buddy? It didn't help that it was so godforsakenly cold because this is December, and by this point our CEO stopped giving us hand warmers because people were misusing them too much. And after trudging through all the snobs over these 2 days and having a few others trying to arrest me and also people who were actually treating me like a person, what a concept, I tried in pride but I got nowhere. It wasn't doing well financially, mentally, physically, emotionally. I was falling to pieces. To make everything worse, when I got my day broken down on the second day there, PS did the same thing as Tuesday, where she walled way too much about the negatives and almost none of the positives. With that happening twice in the same week, I probably should have just gotten up and left the whole company. Also, here's a picture of a GigaChad Sonic that I saw over there. Now, question, does it get better for the rest of the weeks? Well, technically yes, but it doesn't make it good. I was sent for the last 2 days to a territory that was very medieval themed of all things. No sales, unfortunately, but I did have one house that I can only describe as the dangers of mishearing. Let me explain. One of the houses I had was a man who talked from a distance. After a bit of conversation, I heard what I thought was, please come back, so I assumed he meant come back tomorrow if I was in the area. That was not what he said. I think he might have said, don't come back, and when I came back the next day, he proceeded to scream at me at the top of his lungs. And I really do mean top of his lungs, because I don't think he could have screamed louder if he tried, unless he wanted to straighten his throat. He probably could have been up there with the old man who cussed me out, or the bitchy Karen from September, but I probably lost all of my emotion that week, so it could hardly break me. There was one other person who was interested, but I would have to wait until Sunday to talk to them. Just know that as the video continues from here on out, know that my ability to care about this job wore so godforsakenly thin that I didn't have it in me to care about the shit going thrown my way. I had a few good chats with uninterested people, but what's to gain from that? However, that's not even the most memorable part. That was the car ride after the first day in that territory, because when I picked everyone up, SS said he and one of the other guys in the car was hungry, and they asked me to take them through the Burger King drive-thru. And SS wanted to try the SpongeBob SquarePants Burger King meal, since that was happening at the time. And as I was driving back to the office, one of the people in the back seat then proceeded to film SS doing an entire taste test video of every single food item in the meal, except the frozen pineapple foot because they were out of stock at this Burger King. So he was only eating the Krabby Whopper, the bacon stuffed cheesy tot, and the strawberry shortcake pie. He said the Krabby Whopper was okay, but nothing to write home about. The cheesy tots tasted horrible, so he ended up feeding the rest of it to the birds. And the strawberry shortcake pie was hands down the best thing from the meal, while the whole time, I just had to keep my mouth shut until we got back to the office. Originally, the person filming it posted it in the group me, but then he was asked to delete it by SS because it was a very unprofessional video with a lot of profanity and jokes that, again, were not appropriate. Really goes to show how this territory was when the car ride was the most memorable part. Needless to say, this week sucked. So things can only go up from here, right? Technically, yes. To start off this week, I did not revisit that one person who said they would be available that Sunday because it ended up snowing real bad, and I just wasn't feeling up to it that day. However, the whole SpongeBob SquarePants meal via the drive-thru inspired me to try out a movie tie-in. I didn't get the same meal, but rather the Five Nights at Freddy's meal from Popeyes with the breaded tenders and the bites that I called the garlic bites of 87. Get it? That Monday, I was sent to a barrage of mostly townhouses with not much memorable stuff going on, other than stumbling through the snow from the day before. Since it was very close to the winter solstice that week, we were stumbling into the darkness a lot. In this area, I did close one guy, He was eligible for the free TV, included with switching over with the service. And then we watched the ending of Fargo together. I'm not referring to the TV series, I'm referring to the 1996 movie. I'm willing to bet he canceled because he forgot to redeem the free TV. Or he just changed his mind. I don't know, it doesn't matter to me. The next day, I was back in the area where I got the first 2 sale day, but I just had this giant circle of houses and it took so long and it was so boring. I legit probably got 5 talk tos on just the first lap, because nobody was home, and even then, the few either didn't want to talk or weren't compatible with the services. However, I did get into this knowing that the territory was very worked out, and some people told me that. But then again, as I often said, I don't control the speed in which people are sent to the neighborhoods, and I imagine it's pretty annoying, but that's also not my choice. I did this the next day as well, and I basically got nowhere. The closest was one lady who seemed interested, but she had a husband kill. So this territory had more greenfield leads again, whatever the hell they mean. I did, however, see someone make an anime joke with their car license plate by having it say Oni-san when they drove a Nissan. So that was my entertainment for the boring day that was. I'm just gonna move on to the next territory. I was in a set of leads near the safety hazard man, and I was a little closer to where the stores were. There were a lot of boathouses early on, and I was mostly just weaving through the same few streets over and over, as the neighborhoods tended to be in this area. And once the sun went down, I signed up this Spanish guy whose daughter had to translate everything I was saying, but that was another in the books. My second day there, I was mostly going around the same trailer-style houses, but I didn't go anywhere to those, sadly. There was one lady who was interested, but she warned me that her credit was awful, but I still decided to take a jab at it, trying, and unfortunately she was telling the truth and she failed the credit check. However, to reward me for at least trying, she let me take some Chips Ahoy cookies home. So what I learned is that if you can't get a sale, it's still a win if you get free cookies. The rest of the day wasn't anything to note because I literally can't remember anything, and the next day, I don't even remember where I was or anything else had happened, so I'm just gonna move on. So the short answer to the question posed here is Christmas Day, yes. Christmas Eve, no. See, just like the week with the mental breakdown and the mental health day, because Christmas was this week and it fell on a weekday, our CEO made the Sunday before a required work day. Well, for the leaders at least. Even though my leadership promotion wasn't official yet, the previous day, because we didn't have that many people present, our car rides were pretty small. The leads I had were more townhouses, and there was almost nobody home because everyone was probably gone for the holidays or getting ready to be gone for the holidays. See the issue here? The only houses I remembered were the nasty ones. One lady was yelling, but it seemed like she was not angry at me, but rather whoever sent me, and she begged through her yelling just to be taken off the list. So I just contacted KW and took a picture of her house so that she could be taken off the list. I'm not sure if I was allowed to do that, but I am a rather sympathetic person and I feel for them since they're probably annoyed when we come by, and it tests their patience. The other was just one of those old cranky farts who just hate anyone to come to their door. What our CEO asked us to do was we as a leadership core get a total of 10 sales overall because our production numbers were starting to go down and we had to keep going until we reached that point. How many did we get overall? 3. 3 sales. 3 sales amongst us all. I think I just kept going until TC called me being like, hey, when are you deciding you're done? It's getting late because it's the winter solstice. And he wanted to go home, and I was just like, great idea, let's go home, and we did. Now, before I talk about what I did in the field the next day, I'll let you in on some office stuff. I did mention, see, when we were practicing going over our pitch, I was talking to this girl who got promoted very quickly as to why I wasn't properly promoted, and she asked, did you talk about it with your CEO? And I told her, no, I haven't. And she said, let's go do that. See, while this was happening, there was some serious talks going on about other people at the company being troublesome, and while they were wrapping up, the leader said that I needed to talk to the CEO, and I explained the whole thing about the confusing nature of the whole situation, and he asked, why do you feel this way? And I explained it, but then I was trying to not have it drag me down, and through simple words he said, it's official, you're in, so I finally got my damn promotion. So now I'm able to do the leader things I mentioned earlier. Then on my first day, I was sent to an area with almost no sidewalks and walking underneath an interstate. This seemed safe. The rest of the day wasn't really anything to write home about, other than one house. It had this one lady who seemed rather interested, but I just happened to arrive right when she was picking up her children from the nearby school. There was also one other house with a guy who worked for a competitor, so that was a thing at one point. I had a glimmer of hope that I was going to close this lady and then go about my way, but unfortunately, when I arrived, through the hole, I changed my mind and I don't want anything. So that glimmer was over before I knew it. The rest of the day was trying to get all the new leader stuff dealt with, and also getting invited to a road trip to a different office, which I was very hyped for. However, that didn't go anywhere because, spoiler alert, our production was at an all-time low and all the road trips were forever canceled. It would have been nice to get a close on my first day being an official leader, like how I got that buzzer beater close on my first day going solo, but such was not the way of things. The next day was not quite the finest either. I was in a very private neighborhood that had only one entryway, and it just wasn't super compatible, all things considered. I had a few people who may have been on the bandwagon, but it didn't go anywhere. It wasn't a great territory by any means, but perhaps I just didn't deal with it the best. But all things considered, it could have been way worse. The next day was Christmas Eve, and this scheduling was complicated. See, my parents had already made a dinner reservation at a restaurant where we were going to have Christmas Eve dinner, but I know for certainty that neither of them would have ever guessed that come Christmas Eve I would be stuck doing a door-to-door sales job that doesn't give me Christmas Eve off. I later talked to my dad about this months ago, and he talked about how furious he was about the whole situation because he believes that unless you're working in restaurants, retail, or some sort of other essential work position, you shouldn't be required to work on Christmas Eve. But unfortunately, what my father says didn't apply to this job. I would think perhaps I might just be lucky, and since I told them about my dinner reservation ahead of time, so maybe they could make sure I don't have to transport others and mess with their schedules, and I could be in control of mine and leave when it was time for me to leave, and if they wanted to be extra nice to me, they could leave me leads near the office so I wouldn't be running late. None of that happened. I was still having a full car of people, and being in a situation where my leads, our office, and where I had dinner were in 3 separate counties. I guess the only thing that could have made it worse is if I had to drive past one to get to another, but thankfully that didn't happen. I was in the other part of the territory, which was not much larger, and I wasn't expecting a lot of answers because a lot of people were probably traveling for Christmas Eve. However, I would be lying if I said I wasn't getting some people willing to talk to me. In fact, I had one house who was very interested in the product, but just Christmas Eve maybe wasn't the best time to be doing this kind of thing, but they have a point. What kind of sick CEO would force their salespeople to work on Christmas Eve? Well, by the fact that I'm talking about this here, that should answer the question. Whatever, they needed to check their schedule, and I left empty-handed. But because my schedule, everyone else in my car ride had to end early too. By the time it was 3 p.m., I ended for the day and gathered everyone together, dropping them all off at the office, and I drove to my dinner reservation, which was significantly better than the job itself. I got Christmas Day off to hang out with my family, but unfortunately the day later, I had to go back to the job. Also, the car had to go in for service, so I couldn't drive that day. So I was in someone else's car ride for the day. The area I was in was not quite H-Town, but a little bit closer to the city. I'd dropped some people off there in the past, but it was my first time in this area. It was an okay area, all things considered. There were some people interested, but they all wanted to wait until after New Year's, so I just got their numbers, and then they never responded. Just the way of this job, so I'm used to it. I was eventually picked up at the end of the day without much memorability, and the last day of the week I was in an apartment complex where I signed up a guy who I probably shouldn't have signed up. He was probably high the whole process, so what I learned here was don't sign up random guys in apartments smoking joints for internet who also can't remember their banking information. I thought he was a lost cause, but my manager told me I could still sign him up, so I came back. He canceled later, which didn't really surprise me because he probably wasn't in the right mode of thinking when making these decisions. So would this really work for either of us? I don't think so. The year is almost over. How does it end? To start off this week, how about a little bit of detective work? Maybe it's just something different and something more interesting than talking about my usual door-to-door shit for the upteenth time. See, on this first day of the leads, I wasn't getting the most amount of luck with my leads overall, But at one point, I saw this random phone on the ground, and I thought, that's weird, how did this get here? I should probably return it to its owner. So I picked up the phone and tried to call the first emergency contact, but the first thing I noticed was that everything was in Spanish, so I had the thought in the back of my mind that it would be hard to find the owner because of the language barrier. I pondered this whole situation and started giving people status updates that I would be halting my door-to-door stuff temporarily in order to help return this phone to its owner if I can. I tried giving a call to the first contact I could find, since I didn't understand what they said, and by sheer luck, it was the owner's son, and luckily, he knew a bit of English. I explained to him that I found this phone on the ground, and I was trying to find who the owner was, so that they don't have to get into a panic over their phone disappearing. Later, he mentioned he would be wandering around trying to find where I am in order for me to return the phone. This took a bit of time, but eventually we met up with each other, and I gave him the phone, and he was able to return it back to his mother, the actual owner. I don't think I got any more closure about the situation, but what was assumed to be what happened is that at one point, while the woman was going out for a walk, the phone must have fallen out of her pocket, and she must have somehow not noticed it fall. And she came home and perhaps realized it wasn't there, and then by sheer coincidence, somebody, me, noticed, and instead of being a thief, I played the better card and decided to make sure it gets returned to its owner. I did feel like I did something helpful through and through, but when my day was getting broken down, PS then docked points for my time management because of it. Like, sorry, I was trying to be a good Samaritan and not a salesperson. Now, the next day, I couldn't drive because the car was in the shop again, yet somehow, PS still had me down to drive, so I just told SS, the reader of the car ride list, I couldn't drive. So he just had to do some switcheroos to get me into an acceptable car ride, which later worked. Now remember when I mentioned there was a day where I was in an apartment complex, but the other person had to deal with all those racist snobs? Yeah, this next day I was sent to that same territory, except to me, they were just snobs, not racist snobs. Except despite it, it was also still rather clear that these people were willing to give me more of a time of day because of my race, and I got close to closing one old couple who had been having issues with their internet, so it sounded like an easy sign-up, but it gets complicated. See, this guy used to be a lawyer before he retired, so he was trying to err on the side of caution so that I wasn't a scammer, which I was not. It was more of a coincidence that I arrived right when their internet was having problems, and as we were supposed to be helping each other out over the phone a few times, I had JL on the phone with me, and unfortunately, she misheard one of the numbers I was saying. I don't remember what exactly she was saying, but it might have been something like mishearing a 50 as a 15 or something like that, and she was dead set on that number despite the fact that it was a mishearing. The guy was getting very annoyed, just as much as I was, and it caused us to not really get that far into the sale despite it taking up an hour just to do the first damn steps. The one time your upline betrays you instead of helping you. Thanks a lot, JL. But this was one of the few times JL made me frustrated since she actually understood my thoughts, especially close to the end of this whole saga. So shit happens and I just had to move on. I don't criticize the retired lawyer for his actions because he had a valid reason for acting the way he did. Therefore, no sale there. But I got close, and I think the elderly couple still gave me some water. The rest of the day was uneventful, other than the occasional snobs and people who said they wanted to get me out of trouble. I remember the day ending with me almost having another bladder emergency, but luckily I didn't. The next day was New Year's Eve, and the reason why I titled this week Almost Home was because by sheer coincidence, the leads I was given just so happened to be my first set of leads in the county I grew up in. And to make a long story short, it was a big day of nothing. Most people were out of town for New Year's, and even then, this county had a major consensus that the internet company I was doing door-to-door for was a good company, so most people already had it. So I kept having to change what I said around a lot of people. So it just felt great that we're seeing people like me, more than the people in other counties at least. I could see familiarity in ways that other people in this company wouldn't have. It was an honest breath of fresh air, but doesn't do well for getting me money, so I can't say it was a winning equation. What a shame. We also ended early because it was New Year's Eve and we could celebrate the end of the year our own way. Something, New Year's Day came by, and do we get a day off? No, of course not. Did you think that a company that wouldn't give any day off that wasn't Thanksgiving or Christmas give New Year's Day off? not super likely. We did, however, get a late start, so I guess that's better than nothing. I was sent to a new territory near the place. I got that if you're going to complain about the cold, find another job message. It was a lot of walking, no sales, no people who were standing out for being horrible, nothing really memorable, so I'm just moving on. The last 2 days of the week, I just so happened to be put in my own neighborhood by sheer coincidence. I got to talk to some people who were living in some of the houses I often drove by. The first line of houses I had were along a street I stopped taking regularly because another street was a little closer, and there was a large imbalance of houses on different sides. I spent one of the days going about one of the parts of the leads, and the next day on another part of the leads. So they were basically separated in two parts. The first day, I ended up coming across a few people who didn't want it. Some who needed to talk to someone, the usual. I had a close one with a lady who had just moved into her house, but she said not right now because she wanted to finish moving in first, but she wasn't opposed to it. Perhaps you just catch people at the wrong time, and sometimes there isn't too much you can do about it. When it looked like I wasn't going to get any sales, I stumbled across this European couple who decided to sign up with our service ahead of time because their contract with their old company was about to expire. They also gave me some sweets. The man also gave me a car ride back to my car, which I know what you're saying, stranger danger. This guy really didn't want me wandering out in the cold since it was early January we're talking about. After a rough morning the following day, I went to the other leads I had in my neighborhood that was assigned, and things were intriguing, per se. At one point, I stopped by this one house that I gave a very convincing offer to with TN on the other line, and somehow he later said, "Oh, actually, never mind, I'll stick with my current service." Me, being unsure of what I might have done wrong, asked him, "Is there something I could have done better to get you more on board?" I don't remember what he said, but it wasn't important. Again, shit happens, and I worked the hell out of those leads. Moving on to the other leads I had in my neighborhood. Oddly enough, I actually got 2 different leads in my neighborhood, but these ones were near that street I used to drive to the mainland highway. I was just weaving back and forth between 3 streets over and over until I was done for the day. I had a few bad apples and a few fresh apples, but more of the latter. I remember encountering one person who said, "Why the hell do I keep seeing you walking around the neighborhood? What's your deal?" When I explained why, he was just saying, "Well, I don't want it, but I don't want to get law enforcement on you." I think this guy was just cautious. I mean, you've got to think about it from their point of view. Why do I keep seeing this random person pacing the street over and over? What are they trying to do? There were 2 people on that street who were also showing quite the interest, but the first of whom was in the middle of cleaning their basement and wanted to deal with that first before dealing with their internet. The other, I arrived days after their son, who was responsible for the internet bill, left for vacation, and he just complained about the internet issues. But I would need to talk to him, but I can't remember if I ever got his number. But on the bright side, the couple there offered me some food, and we talked a bunch. Considering how shitty the job has been, I again cherish moments like these. However, there was one other thing that happened in the middle of all the walking and talking. At one point, I got a call from a number that I thought I saw before. When I picked it up, it was actually the guy who said he wanted to wait until after Christmas, and he got another flyer in the mail, and he wanted to switch to our service, and the number he had was mine. So that was the first one he called. He told me exactly what he wanted, and he was signed up with no problem at all. There were also 2 more houses that stuck out to me, less about the service and more about being acquainted with the people. The first was this lady who already had her service but needed me to do some tech support, and she also offered a little more hospitality when I was leaving. She loved talking with me, and if my oven wasn't broken, I would bake her some cookies. The other lady was a lady who lived in a house I often drove by, and she had a very vibrant yard, and she said she didn't want the service for the moment because she needed to focus on house renovation, mostly replacing her ceiling, but what she did say is I should check out her yard in the springtime. You know, like when I'm recording this, but I haven't gotten around to that. I think I might have mentioned that I wasn't even going to be at the job by that spring, which, foreshadowing the fact that I'm making this video tells you what happened. However, these 2 days were rather hard to get through, not because of the field, but because after the field, our CEO ran our game plan, and I remember the first of those 2 days, he just kept going on, and by the time we left the building, it was past midnight, and I don't like staying up late. We still gotta get up in the morning. The other day, he held us till about 11:30 p.m., but I still got back home before midnight. Technically speaking, considering how tired I was, I could have left early to get some rest, but our CEO literally would have fired me on the spot if I did that. At one point I looked up to see if what he did was even legal, and it's technically not illegal, it just put a poor taste in a lot of our mouths. The next 2 days I was sent to this small town by a river, and it was not anything to write home about. I remember calling KW because I was trying to think of a way to keep myself entertained after getting almost no answers, and only just to watch some silly videos in my downtime to entertain myself. So I guess seeing an animatic of a meme that was popular on TikTok months ago paid off, I suppose. I didn't get any sales at all, but I remember one of the houses I had included a guy who was screwed over by our service, and then when I came back on the next lap, there was suddenly an influx of police cars, so I had to think about how am I going to go about this. Even though I was told this was a fresh territory, it was pretty clear to me, according to the people who were there, that a lot of people had been here prior. However, at the end of the second day, my team ended up having our own team night to be away from all the hustle and bustle from the job. It was set up by the mother of one of the other people at the company. We had dinner together, we played Uno, and I kicked everyone's ass, and just generally enjoyed ourselves. I remember I thought I was running late for it, only to learn I was the first person to show up. At the end of it, the location had to change, but I didn't stay for it and went home, but I later found out that PS got a tattoo despite being afraid of needles. The next day, that Friday, I literally forgot everything that happened, so let's move on to Saturday. Oh boy, this Saturday was something to talk about. See, with the final day of the work for sales, it was a miserable day weather-wise. It was raining and pouring all day long, and everyone in my group was struggling to get any sales. Actually, the whole company was having a massive shortage, and it might have been an understatement to call it messy. It was one of those days where one particular encounter with a lead completely stood out from everything else. Let me explain. It was this one lady who only spoke Spanish, so I had to get a translator up, and she was for some reason asking me to open all of her documents, and she kept going in and out of her house for whatever reason, and then she just wasn't listening to a single thing I was saying, and I don't know what the hell she wants, so I can't do anything with my tablet, and after at least 20 minutes of dealing with this shit and constantly running in place, I just gave up on her. I know this is sounding very vague, but it's because I suppressed so many specific details after it happened. I ended up getting into a very long conversation with the translator, and I told him that the whole experience made me want to hit my head against a wall over and over, and the guy on the other end was just saying, I don't even blame you. She didn't know what she wanted, and she was refusing to give you any of the information you needed for your job. This isn't the first time I had to translate for salespeople, but if I were you, I would have lost my patience with them as well. I really do honor your commitment in trying to pull through despite all odds stacked against you. After that happened, I told my group I had a story for the car ride about the situation. I did have one other family who I made some progress with, but they ultimately decided not to switch over. The rest of the people either didn't answer because they were sleeping, it was the weekend, or they just didn't want the service. I came back all soaking wet, same with everyone else, and like that wasn't enough, I remember one of the other people in the car ride was just whining and complaining about everything, which is not the type of energy you want to bring to the car ride. After all, we did emphasize the contagiousness of energy and how it attracts. So enough about that. Now, the question remains, what shit gets done? A lot, actually. The first 2 days were in a small little village by a bay, and a lot of the houses had marinas in their backyards. I had one guy over there getting on my case for circling the neighborhood, which is, what I'm supposed to do. Some no's, some no answers, the usual. I managed to close one house somewhere in the mix, but the people above us had to complete that close due to some technical difficulties. I remember when I got the close and I was putting in the records, one of my teammates said, "Who has my follow-up?" And I said, "I do," and then posted my order thing in the chat, and she was just like, "Oh, you weren't lying." The biggest issue with this territory was that this territory had almost no lighting. No street lamps. It was like walking through a silhouette after the sun went down. I did, however, get the sweet picture of the sunset that I am using as my phone background. The second day wasn't as eventful as the first day, and I didn't get any sales, but I didn't have to do as much walking, so once I worked out that territory, I requested a new one. The next day was an interesting one, to say the least. See, on this Wednesday, our company had an outage around the globe, and people were not able to properly connect, which doesn't do well for our reputation at all. But one person from our car ride said, "Aren't you with the company that had a massive outage?" And we are supposed to say, "That's why we've been sent to your neighborhood." I did have a group of 2 approach me, and they told me they had been having their phone services, which were with our company. I told them, no, it's not just you. We are currently looking into that and trying to fix it. I only had 2 other people in this territory that really stuck out. The first was this woman who needed faster internet than what she had, and sounded very on board with switching to our company, but she needed to talk about it with her husband first before she could finalize the decision. The next guy, who lived next door, looked at me and said, "You guys again? For the last time, nobody in this neighborhood wants your service." And I tried telling him perhaps there's new people who do want it, but he threw the whole, everyone here in this neighborhood has been living here for at least 30 years, and none of them want the service. I don't remember if I mentioned his neighbor was interested, but he probably had his head so far up his butt that he probably wouldn't have listened, even if I tried. It was a strange day considering the circumstances that we were completely thrown into and were completely out of our control, but sometimes it's just how the cookie crumbles. The next day I went to a different area in the same town, and it was much more a private area, and this territory was all over the place. It had private condos, multi-story townhouses, houses on the streets next to highways, trailers. I can't even narrow them all down. It was just like a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none style territory. I made no sales, but I did wish this guy the best of luck in becoming a father, so that's something. I literally remember almost nothing else other than that had happened. But partway through the day, I got a message from my manager, PS, that we had a mandatory meeting at the end of the day. I was only thinking it might have been it, and she was going to be moving on or something. She literally said if we didn't attend, we'd be fired. So we needed to be there or be square. Once I arrived, I was sent to a room, and without going into too much detail, basically PS confessed that she told us lies about her life, and she was also now homeless, but believed she could persevere given the mood of feeling on top of the world, and she had things to do, and at the end of it all, I agreed to a whole motto, let's get this shit done, in hopes that this would make things better, because our manager often would call our performances shit and would say things like, what the f*** is up with this? Which is not the type of things to motivate, quite the opposite actually. They make me feel damaged and harassed, but I guess I was nothing if not adamant that shit would get better and done. Which, judging by the fact that we're close to the end, didn't last. Now, let's go on to the next day, because this was surely a day to talk about. Oh boy. Remember how I mentioned towards the beginning that this company had a thing they did on Fridays? We would be ultra competitive and how I wasn't a fan of it all? Yeah, it's still happening.
Never stops happening for that matter.
But I digress. On this Friday, I was originally assigned to go to a particular town, and then right when we were about to get to the town, one of us gets a phone call from the CEO saying, we're going to be cutting your leads back in the town where you guys were the previous 2 days. A town that is in the complete opposite direction, plus another 20 minutes north, after I had just used some of that gas to get to the original destination. So begrudgingly, I started to drive to the new leads. And since I'm driving, I can't check my new leads. But then everyone else is checking theirs, and they're on some sets of apartments. However, I would later learn something that was a bit of a problem. Of the other 3 people in my car ride, 2 of them couldn't get into their apartments because they were apartments that required either putting in a passcode, which we don't have, or swiping a card to get in, which we also don't have. We had the same issue the previous day, and I was the only one who realized that one of the 2 sets of apartments matched the ones from the previous day. So eventually, while we're waiting, I checked my leads, and by this point, we all soon each had a different set of apartments in the area. But when I checked mine when we were dropping off TC, I found that despite what I originally thought, I did not have a set of apartments as my leads. I had a regular set of houses.
A lot of them too.
It didn't help that since it was mid-January, it was really f***ing cold. To try to encounter this issue, TC came back to the car and we dropped off someone else. In fact, it was actually the same guy who dealt with those racist snobs months earlier. Fortunately, he was able to get into his apartment without any issue, so that was a breath of fresh air. Since the last person couldn't get into their leads, we had to ask, what are we gonna do? See, since we were in the same town from days before, TC had some callbacks in other houses he wanted to deal with, so I just had to drop them off there. Also, since the whole competitive thingy-make thing was happening, we had to challenge someone, and TC challenged me and gloated about how he would reign superior and I was going to lose, causing me to get pied in the face by him when we came back. As for the other girl, rather than trying to get her new leads, which would have taken way too long, since I had so many leads included in my directory for the day, we decided that she would bunny hop with me for the whole day. So in short, it was the first day since the retrain with TC where I went about my leads with another person. It also meant we both had to endure the freezing cold together, but at least we can learn from each other. We kind of took turns knocking on doors and saying the pitch. She commented about one of my methods of saying hello, since she knocks twice, but is gentler with her hellos, compared to me, who hollers it out louder, but only knocks once. There's no right or wrong way to do it in this equation. It's just some people deal with it differently than others. There was one callback that she had, but I didn't get. But at one point, I got a phone call from the lady from 2 days earlier, and she said, I got the opportunity to talk with my husband, and he's on board. Let me through the process. At this moment, I told my door-to-door partner to keep going while I handled the call on my own, and she knew exactly what she needed. But I mostly had to do it via text messages, but I, through it all, signed her up.
So not leaving empty-handed.
Also, what did that guy say about nobody in the neighborhood wants it? Huh? We stopped at a Popeyes to rest at one point before getting back to what we were doing.
We also gave status updates to leaders like SS, KW, and the leader of the girl bunny hopping with me.
And after several hours, the day was done, and we could pick up TC and the other guy. However, I would hear after picking them up from an Ollie's Bargain outlet what happened to them. Apparently, some point during the day, someone in the neighborhood called the cops on TC, and he had to leave his leads and bunny hop with the other guy. So therefore, it turned out that our car ride turned into 2 groups of 2. TC was screwed over real bad since he missed his callbacks he might have had, and since he challenged me, he wouldn't have been able to throw a pie in my face. But instead, I was going to throw a pie in his face. That's what happened. I got to throw a pie in TC's face since some snooty person forced law enforcement onto him, and that's not going to save you from getting pied in the face by me. And by a pie, I mean a paper plate covered in whipped cream. I mean, at least nobody called the cops on me. That won't mean anything, right?
The last day was just me and TC, and we went to the leads we were supposed to go to on the previous day.
But probably for most of the rest of my time at the job, TC held that grudge against me, hoping that he could get his revenge. We were trying to get through, and TC got a close very early on, so I was coming to him for advice, as I was supposed to do. I also had one house that I really regret giving my number to, because he said he was interested, only for days later for him to call me back and go on some whole tangent about how I was trying to use the electrical wires to kill his dog and singe his children. And I couldn't hang up because I was in the middle of driving, and I couldn't even respond back because he gave me absolutely no social cues to speak without it seeming like I was interrupting him. Things weren't going superior until, I repeat, 15 minutes before we were finishing up. I knock on this door of this family with a giant carnival-style food trailer in their yard about the service, and they were thinking about making some changes to their internet service since some of the issues were becoming apparent to them. Halfway through the process, suddenly the Wi-Fi stops working, and I am stuck resetting the whole order, and then the damn thing doesn't load, and I had to call up both TC and our higher-ups to get the whole thing dealt with in hopes that the impulse doesn't drop with them, which thankfully they understood the issues. At one point, I walked further in the neighborhood to see if I could fix the issue, but it didn't. I tried and pried as hard as I could, but through it all, the links were sent, and after 3 hours, I finally got them signed up almost that whole time. TC had to wait at a godforsaken KFC or something to the point where people are asking, why have you been here for so long? It was a headache, to put it lightly. But TC did say to me, I'm glad and impressed you remained calm and patient through the process. Because goddamn, I was so ready to have this shit be over. So instead of ending at 3:30, I ended at past 6 p.m. Sundown. I drove TC home and then I went home. Finally, this week of chaos is over. Now, we're reaching the end game. I'm going to say right off the bat that these 2 weeks I got no sales at all, but it gets crazier as it goes on. Mark my words. In my first 2 days of the week, I was sent to this one area that was kind of like an E-shape, which means a lot of walking, and it did teach me an important lesson of the importance of the fishbowl theory. See, I didn't mention it before, but I confess that my fishbowl sometimes wasn't the best. And that's even coming from someone who isn't doing stupid TikToks in the middle of the road like other people at the company were doing.
I mean, you'd be surprised how many times in the middle of the field I would scream, "Ow, my penis!" Just like Tedo does in Bird Brain.
There were also a handful of times I would sing the entirety of the Weird Al Show theme. I guess like a speaking exercise because this job requires a lot of speaking. It also taught me the lesson of it doesn't matter what brand you're wearing, you're representing that brand in some way, shape, or form upon wearing it. It all came from one door I knocked on where I was greeted by a man wearing a sweatshirt for a home installation company, and I don't remember what he said, but all I remember is that he just started to berate me for literally no reason before slamming the door. And through that, I couldn't even feel angry. I wanted to piss on his lawn, but then again, I am representing a company, so I can't do that. However, since he was wearing that sweatshirt, he probably had no idea that his demeanor is making me never want to use his home installation company, which doesn't do good for a personal reputation. So let this be a lesson. If you're wearing a shirt of a particular company, whether you work for them or not, remember that you're representing that company somehow. Other than that, and having an accident on the second day, there wasn't really anything to note about the territory, so I'm just going to move on. The next 2 days was spent in an apartment complex near where we got lunch, and after one of the incidents that happened, it caused me to change some of my habits that perhaps I didn't realize was a bad habit until someone took note of it. Granted, it was not an appropriate way, but I would be lying if I said I didn't change my habits after the events. It was a set of apartments that was rather large, so I would deal with odd numbers one day and even numbers the other day. I had a few close calls, but they fell through either because people were not responding, me forgetting about grants, or the decision makers just not being available. Welcome to Door to Door. However, on the second day, one lady was getting very annoyed with my demeanor, and then she proceeded to get on a mean tangent and proceeded to film me without my consent, with a purpose of, arresting me. But feeling like my security was in jeopardy, I took matters into my own hands and got the cops to where I was to address the situation. They didn't do shit about it. I mean, I am no law enforcement expert, so I may not completely know if I were in the wrong or the officer was in the wrong to dismiss it in such a way. But what ended up happening was just him saying, avoid the area for the rest of the day. The reason I did so was because TC had a similar incident weeks earlier, and they found what they did was immoral, and yet the lady served no repercussions. That, or it could have been like that bitch from late September, who could have gotten the cops to arrive after I left for the night. It was a frazzling and frustrating experience. The following day, I was back in the area with that guy who would only sign up if I switched his phone service, but it was on the opposite side of the street, and this time, not much happened. Had one guy who kept flip-flopping between our service and our main rival service, but he decided to keep the rival service, and one guy who was interested, but he was busy that day after and wouldn't be available until Sunday. There was, however, one part where AH had to bunny hop with me until his friend came to pick him up, so that was a small thing that happened. Last day of the week, I was in a different territory, but nothing of note really happened, so I don't see a point in talking about nothing. Oh boy, we have reached what was quite possibly the week that tested my patience more than any other week of this job, and seemed to show how careless this company perhaps was, and what made me decide I'm going to get out of this company if it's the last thing I do. Let me give a little bit of context. That Sunday, there was a very, very bad snowstorm, and I was basically stuck inside my house and could hardly get out of my driveway, and when the plows came through, they did an awful job of cleaning the streets. My home street only had one side of the street plowed, and it was the opposite side from the one that my house was residing on. The next day, the weather permitting, and the fact that almost nobody could move would likely mean that I wouldn't be going anywhere. Health risks, you know? Even then, my parents told me, yeah, you're not going to be able to move your car in the snow. It's not just about the snow, but also about the ice because it was so cold that the snow would freeze and be near impossible to shovel. On that Monday morning, I checked for updates and they said, due to inclement weather, the day will start at noon. I was still unsure if it would be safe enough to do door-to-door in this weather. I spent about 2 to 3 hours shoveling my driveway to the best of my ability, and it was about 1 p.m. by the time I finished. So I knew I wasn't going in. I told my CEO and PS, and then PS through the hole, next time tell us closer to the time since this is going to count as a no-call, no-show. If I were the Hulk, I would have probably broke my phone by squeezing it too hard in anger. I wasn't having it, but I didn't respond back because it would be too apparent to me that since they didn't care about our safety, I would have no reason to care about this stupid company. Oh, but it does get worse. Much worse. Remember how I mentioned that we had this one town/city we had leads in sometimes that was significantly farther from all the others? And how in order to make sure they don't get an unfair disadvantage, they leave the office early? Well, guess what? For the next 3 days, every single day, we left late and we're constantly getting these leads last minute and leaving at the same time as everyone else, and we still have to stop for lunch somehow so we don't go about our leads on an empty stomach. And some of the days, I literally had to wait for people to get their food, and maybe I'm just impatient. Also, I swear half the people who were interested, I had to email them pictures of the packages since it would be so confusing. I'm blending all of these days together because they all seem to blend in. I was pretty mad at PS for this, since I was having days where I wouldn't even get to my leads until 4:30 and have to end between 6:30 and 7 p.m., giving us basically no time to, do our job. What a mess. Even if it wasn't my stubbornness and wanting to end the day I got a sale, I would have gotten up and left. I probably should have done that, looking back on it. Also, I almost crashed at the end of the first of those 3 days, and yes, this was the exact same exit ramp where SS almost crashed in November, and then when we were driving back afterwards, a car that looked almost identical to mine crashed on the highway walls. As TC said it best, it looks like some Final Destination shit was happening. Also, here's a picture of Miku to lighten things up a little bit. I know this has been a very negative video, but sometimes it's just what I gotta do to get it off my chest. And if I taught some people more about life as someone stuck doing door-to-door, I guess my work isn't a failure. The next day, I was someplace closer, but nothing of note really stood out, so I'm moving on again. So before I talk about this last day, here's some more context. See, our CEO called everyone in individually about how our sales had been doing, and how it was overall pretty poor, and how he was starting to implement a new system. I hadn't gotten a close since the one that took 3 hours. To hold the leaders to a higher standard, he implemented a new system where on Saturdays, once someone gets 2 sales, they can end early for the day, but if you don't, you have to keep going until you do. Now, you might see problems pretty quickly. First, when is the end cap time? What time is too late? We can't control what others say. There are so many questions and observances with no answers. Also, we had a meeting with another executive that evening, so my plan was to get home by that time and go to the call and participate. Now, this day wasn't really off to a great start because more than half of our leads were in Dial-In apartments. The only person who could get into their leads was one of the old but newer leaders who had the same leads I had on Labor Day and 9 weeks later in early November. The rest of us were kind of other random places. One person had some condos, another had big houses on a street with no sidewalks, and I had a small dead-end neighborhood. Not too far into my leads, I hired this one Russian guy, and he said he was interested in my service, but he couldn't make any decisions because his daughter made all of his decisions by his internet for him, and she was near impossible to reach because she always worked overtime, and she works as a real estate agent who is always working on the clock. But at least he rewarded me for my time by offering me some ice cream. I only made it about a lap, maybe my second lap early on, until suddenly my tablet runs out of battery. Likely hindered by the few slips of ice I had, because who at this company doing door-to-door wasn't slipping on the ice? One of the earlier days, I literally immediately got told off by a man who didn't want it, and then immediately slipped and fell on his lawn and slid down like I was sledding. Yep, this is my life now. I just chilled in my car where it was not as cold while the executive call happened, and then afterwards, I met up with one of the people at a Royal Farms. For 2 hours. Apparently, he was having issues with his tablet as well and ended early. While waiting, he tried to get in contact with the other 2 from the car route. The leader, who had the same leads I did on Labor Day, went to the nearby Target, and the other girl refused to contact us, but we later learned that she Ubered back home because she was livid with PS for this. Also, she was also on my team. So let's get angry at PS together. I don't even blame her. So instead of ending at 3:30 like the original plan, I didn't get home until 10 p.m. And for this job, we had to do weekly goals every week by 11:59. It was messy. Also, before I move on, I will mention also that this week, we lost 4 leaders. The only one I mentioned earlier was AH, who never really recovered from the family emergency he faced back in November, which left me with a lot of empathic distress, as well as one who quit, one who left to go back to college, and one who was fired. So with all that stress all behind me, time for the final stretch. Only 3 weeks remain. The reason why I say is delayed is because, as I'll explain later, I got out of my production slump this week. But there was also one of the biggest frustrations of the whole job. That first day I was back in the same area as Saturday, so I got to finally finish out those leads, and I got close with 2 people, one of whom, like the cookie girl, owed us way too much money, and the second guy, I showed him the prices, but he decided to keep the service he had. Next day I was sent to a place near those townhouses from mid-December, where the Fargo guy was, but I didn't really get anything with those leads, other than the guy who went to the shooting range and also threatened to shoot me. But if I was able to respond, I would say, don't shoot me, at least help me find a new job. I want to leave this stupid job, and I want to continue living. But whatever. I had one call back, but she didn't answer, so it's the way. There might have been one bad apple in there, but I encountered so many scumbags in this job, they all seemed to blend. Now the next day seemed rather run-of-the-mill, but I did eventually end my rolling streak and got another sale on the board. The first since the 3-hour sale. Now this guy was rather interesting because he actually said up front that he owed our company money, and he was getting sent bills he'd already paid or something along those lines. But when I ran his credit, he had no money owed, and we were able to move forward with the process, much to his satisfaction. I think we needed the higher-ups again, and he even gave me the contact information of his friend who had just moved in recently, which was in an area I had leads in November, and chances are someone was already over there since, so that didn't really go anywhere. The next day, oh boy, the next day. I was back in that territory where I was for 3 straight days, back when the bunny hopping was happening. I didn't get any sales that day, but it is forever poisoned by one lead. This area had a lot of those trailer-style homes, and many were hard to get to because of how there was so much snow left over from the snowstorm. However, there was one house that I don't want to say ruined my day, but they soured it quite a bit. And thinking about it, sometimes I wonder if I did anything wrong or if they were just that rotten of an apple. See, on this house, I knocked and a woman came to the door and said something I couldn't quite understand. I asked her if she could open the door so I could hear her better, and she refused. Later, I told her I liked her stickers on her window, but she refused to open the door. I just walked away since she seemed like she didn't want to talk to me, since when I asked her to repeat herself, she only got angrier. About 30 seconds later, she exits her house and gets on her phone while I continue. About 5 minutes later, a bunch of police cars pull up to the street. One pulls up to the woman's house, another pulls up to where I am, which is farther down, away from the woman. Apparently, this woman literally called the cops on me for harassment. I guess asking her to repeat herself because I couldn't hear her through a window counts as harassment. Then again, I guess you never know what people are going through. When everything was put together, the officer looked at me, and I guess unlike the officer from weeks earlier, this guy was actually willing to not leave me hanging, even though he knew what he had to say was probably not what I wanted to hear. But sometimes that's just how it's going to go. I have no right to fuss about it. Later, the officer went up to me, and I think they said although the woman might have not been completely in the right to call the cops on me because I wasn't doing anything illegal in their eyes, I was also not allowed in the neighborhood because it was thought that I had no permit for the county or town, which I would have needed one for each, and I would have to leave. At this point, I didn't even care enough to fight them because that's not the right thing to do in my eyes, so what I did was call up my car ride leader and ask him to pick me up and leave the area so things didn't get more ugly. Also, might I add, this is the same town where TC got the cops called on him. So I guess we encountered some people who had a vendetta with people in our style of business. Or 2 people from the same town just coincidentally called the cops on 2 different people doing the same thing. It took me an hour to get new leads, so an hour of waiting in his car while admin deals with this mess. Which means an hour of not working. Which at this point, is that really a bad thing for a job as shitty as this? It's not like I was trying to get this to happen. And TC was in our car ride too, and he was just like, bro, they're trying to arrest you here too? They don't like us here, huh? When I got the new leads, I did those for the rest of the time. The next day I went to a barrage of townhouses near where I hit my first 2 sales in a day, but not much happened there. maybe one close call, but the report died faster than I did in Cloudless. Now, this final day of the week was a rather interesting one to think about because before I left to go into the office, I got a text from my parents about how, in their opinion, I shouldn't have been allowed to work door-to-door on that day, considering it was 0 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And yet, we still had to. It was so hard to call my upline because grabbing my phone to text felt like grabbing a rock, and within a minute, my fingers would be frostbitten since my gloves were not fingerless. So I had to take them off in order to text. I tried with it, but it was rather obvious that I would not make it super long in this temperature. Oh, and remember that thing about not being able to leave on a Saturday until you get at least 2 sales? Yeah, nobody was following that anymore. I think we all just agreed that it was stupid. I eventually did find a house that was interested, but they wanted to wait until after the soccer game was done before they actually talked about it. I did get them signed up, but unfortunately they had to cancel because there was something inside of their wall, so they couldn't properly get installed. And the other callback I had didn't answer when I came back. And everyone else from my car ride had basically bailed out from the cold. Also, fun fact, this was another territory where some of my leads matched ones I had in the past. It was the same territory I went to after the HOA incident. Go figure. Starting off this week, I was sent to a territory that was literally walking distance from our office. So, for those 2 days, I didn't even bother doing much transportation. One of those days I was carpooled there, and the other one I just walked to the territory. The thing about this territory is that it had been wired for our service within the past several months, and if I recall, I was employed at the company when they did it, so it was labeled as newly open for sale, which actually means you're like the 4th or 5th person who's been sent there in the past 2 to 3 months, if not less than that. And they are getting tired of us fast. At this point, I didn't want to throw the bullshit of they might have done it poorly or something like that because I'm just overly genuine with people. One of the things I most remembered about this territory was how at one point in the day, there was a raccoon occupying this whole parking space and it wouldn't move for an extended period of time. I almost thought it was dead, but it wasn't dead. It was just laying in the sun for some reason. I didn't know what that was about, but I didn't question it much. Another thing I did throughout this territory was check out a lot of those little free libraries in the area, and on one particular point, one of the days, I got myself a book to read to pass the time. I mean, I was starting to care more about that than the job itself. I had some people say they would contact me back, but nothing happened, whatever. I ended the second day by going to a Qdoba and getting myself some chips and dip, and made the probably not best decision of bringing them into the building because other people moosh off food like dogs when they see roast turkey. The next day I was in a new territory that only had one close call of a close, and that was an old lady with an old version of our service, but the tablet wasn't working properly no matter what we did. Even with KW assisting me via FaceTime because one of us had an Android, the other one of us had an iPhone. Eventually, since she had something to do shortly, I had to end the exchange with her. But there was one thing she did that helped me out a bit. And by that, I mean she was one of those people to tell me that the next door neighbor, who I also had as a lead, had died and her car was still there in the lot, and people over the house were just renovating the house with repairs because I guess her family decided to not keep the house after her death. So I just put the lead down as decision maker not home and a note saying DM is dead. This wasn't the first time this would happen since it also happened in November. I'm also not even counting the house from December where the name of the owner was listed, and then when I went to the house there was a chime with the person's name in a year span that seemed to correspond with their lifespan, and it said something like, "We miss you." I was empty-handed that day, unfortunately. The next day, I by sheer coincidence was sent to another territory right by my family home. If it were a little closer, I probably would have driven there and stopped for a visit. Because if it wasn't obvious enough, perhaps I'm just not trying as hard with this door-to-door thing because the company is not giving me enough of a reason to care. That didn't happen. I had some townhouses in a neighborhood that was right next to a highway, just like that horrible neighborhood from the 7th week. No sales, but I got close with one guy who was right about to leave to go to Buffalo Wild Wings, so it didn't happen, alas. There was also one where the owner was in the hospital, so nothing could be done. Again, as I mentioned in the New Year's Eve segment, most people around here already have our service, so it was very far and in between. The next day, I was back in that area despite asking for new leads. PS refused to send me any leads, and the amount of leads I did have left was significantly under the law of averages for houses. So in order to deal with this clusterfuck, it was decided I would bunny hop with one of the other people on the car ride who was also learning, so she wasn't on a retrain per se, but I was there to help guide her at a few points. And the team spirit was there because we were also on the same team. Neither of us really got sales, but we did get caught up in doing tech support, which just happens sometimes. The last day of the week was Valentine's Day, and it was a relatively interesting day because our team dominated the entire first half of the day. One of the newer guys got on board first, then our driver second, and then I did. The guy wasn't an easy street either because he thought I was a scammer, but once I called the upline and the like, he went, "Wait a second, this person who just randomly came to my door talking about internet is legit." I also told him about how I was ready to move forward to something else more in my field, and he promised he would stay in contact with me if he found something, but he never did. The last person from our car ride who didn't bail out early got on board too, and since nobody gives a shit about the bullshit rule of you can't leave until you get at least 2 sales, because it wasn't being enforced, we left around the time we typically ended on Saturdays, and I got to enjoy our Valentine's Day dinner alone because I'm single, but I watched the Olympics, so that was pretty fun. As they say in speed skating, now time for the final sprint. Prior to the actual week ahead, my parents were over to discuss the steps moving forward with the job since they knew I needed to act. And by act, I mean get the hell out. There was another conference, and my parents didn't really want me to go because they didn't see it as benefiting me in reality. The final thing they asked me to do was send a letter to my CEO saying I was terminating my employment immediately. But I held off from doing that until I got the ducks in a row for another job that I got an acceptance for later in the week. On that Monday, since I was not driving, I spent the whole car ride filling out the form about the position and my goals dealing with it, since I knew this was going to be my cleanest getaway from the job. The territory I was in was the same general territory as the area with that snobbish woman who made me remember that Kevin Hart skit, but I didn't have that area, thankfully. Only one street of it. I had a few leads in that area in common. I just skipped over if they said no originally, assuming they'd say no again, because I believe a lot of people's opinions about such a thing wouldn't change that quickly. When I was going about that area, one guy came out and asked if I knocked on his door, and I told him yes, and he said he was on board with it, but he just couldn't do it in the moment. So I would have to wait another few days for him to be available. I called him a few points later, but he was unable because of how weird his shift times were. Such the way sometimes. The rest of the leads were not anything memorable, but I was highly curious of what was to come the next day. The next day, I wasn't assigned anyone for a car ride, so instead of requesting new leads, I just went to finish leads from weeks earlier, mostly some untouched townhouses and a few callbacks. About 3 p.m. I received the result of my interview, and I passed. So as a result of this, I ended up telling all my major managers like PS, KW, SS, JL, TN, and my CEO I had something I needed to talk to them about. PS was the first to respond, and I told her I got accepted into a different position, so I'd likely be leaving very soon. For the rest of the week, I told most of the rest of them what was happening, and they were understanding. I mean, our CEO and SS did both agree that I deserve so much better with the job, and the constant exposure to TJ and ES was detrimental to my growth. The rest of the day wasn't anything to write home about. The only really memorable interaction I had with someone was these 2 little kids who randomly just walked up to me and proceeded to say, 6, 7, and then walked away. But the biggest issue I was running into with this territory was just how many abandoned houses there were. This area wasn't given proper care, and the only places with proper care were, the places where people actually lived. I was getting ready for the new job and fulfilling all the different behind-the-scenes things as I needed to do, like printed slips, mailed in materials, and the like. However, even though I drove to my leads alone, I did have to pick up a few people because I was the nearest leader, and the leader that had originally taken them to their territories had a family emergency. The next day I went to a different apartment complex, and it was not the most eventful, but the middle part of the day were where the negatives came in. First of all, one of the people in my car ride had a medical emergency that fell on me because I was the driver, so I had to pick her up, and then she called an Uber to take her to the hospital. When that was done, I went through my 7 houses that I didn't have as part of the apartment complex, and the very last one, I will admit, I probably fucked up real bad. See, at this house, they had a sign that I assumed that they had to keep door-to-door people away. But of course, the whole "we're customer service" bullshit. I made a joke alluding to the sign, specifically the part that says, "We're too broke to buy anything," as a way of saying, we're not buying anything at the door, which you're not buying anything from the door with me around. But then it came out the wrong way, and he was very, very insulted, even when I tried to correct myself. It was overpowered by his aggressive yelling of something like, "Get the hell off my porch," and then he called me the N-word, hard R by the way, before slamming the door. I felt very guilty about the whole thing, and it took about half an hour to recover. I talked about it with some other people from the team, knowing that I felt like I messed up real bad. I felt like I ruined the reputation of the company for this guy, and they were trying to calm me down. And I didn't want to end my job doing stuff like that. But then again, I probably wasn't going to be in this area in the future, so what was I to wallow about? Whoever is there in the future, I am so sorry. No point about me wallowing about it now, because it's been months and the wound has long since healed. I spent these last 2 days in this one town, and on the first of those days, about half of my leads were either in a condominium that was passcode locked or a senior care facility of all places. At the end of the first day, I was so close to closing this one lady, but she had to go back to finishing her work. It was a collaborative effort between both the spouses, and unfortunately, it had to end like that. Oh well. I just needed to hope that I could get something the second day in the area, which was spent a little farther away in some condos and townhouses that I could completely access, and I had a few callbacks for the day, but only one came out as a close, and it was this South Asian couple who I had to visit twice because I needed to wait for the wife to get home, but she was on board since they knew it was already better than what they had. They didn't fight me on anything. The other callback didn't have the wife available for the day, so that didn't go anywhere. However, with that one close and the situation I put myself in, I was pretty satisfied to call that sale my last sale, and that Friday my very last day on the job. The condos weren't much to note other than one lady who threw the whole, "You're actually not allowed to be doing this kind of thing in this area," and I'm pretty sure I responded with something like, "That's completely fine. And after today, I'm done doing this, and it's also getting late, so I better get going." Finished my day at the townhouses and got another woman who really didn't want the service, so I casually dropped the fact that I was quitting the job, and she also wished me good luck. The next day, I didn't go into the office, instead dealt with some of the issues of preparing for the job, and the horrifying, ugly truth was revealed. The job was fake all along. I was rather embarrassed, but not really upset because it was my own fault for not seeing the red flags earlier, and upon doing my research, it was a popular scam, but luckily my bank account information was never entered with them, so I couldn't lose any money with them, and I blocked them everywhere I could right afterwards. Then I went back to the job site and flagged them for spam. Definitely felt like I dodged a bullet for sure. But I saw no reason to continue with this horrible job, and with how much I didn't want to jump back into the rabbit hole of the job market, it was a jump I was willing to take. Oh yeah, I somehow never mentioned the fact that since our CEO was being a dimwit and forgot about President's Day and tried to have payroll go in despite it, nobody got paid that whole week, and we had our quad annual Philly conference that Sunday. So several people at the company couldn't even buy the clothes they were going to buy because they didn't have the money. Really doesn't do well for this company at all. Luckily, I already had my outfit. I still went to the conference, but it just felt very samey, like I've already seen everything. But I revealed to everyone that yes, it was true, I was leaving. We took some pictures and left early in order to beat out an upcoming snowstorm. When I left to head back to the office, I dropped everyone off and drove home, and I never returned to the office. Except not really, because I came back for one day to return some equipment I borrowed and get my last check about 4 weeks later. That Monday, I stayed home and relaxed, because my door-to-door sales job was officially terminated by my own choice. And now what has happened since? Well, on the night of the conference, PS sent a heartfelt goodbye letter in the whole company GroupMe, our team GroupMe, and my personal text messages. I stuck around in the main chat for another week, but left all the corresponding extra GroupMes except the team one to catch wind of what was happening. I was later removed from that GroupMe after a few weeks. However, I was still in the company Discord until I was removed from it while I was typing out the script, and I have since gotten a new job as a camp counselor, which I'm not sure if it has started by the time I'm releasing this video, but it has not started yet as of when I'm recording it, but whatever. And I swear, the trainings I have done so far for this position have paid me more than I did with this job in a month. And some of these trainings have only been happening for a few days. Ever since, I have had nobody try to arrest me, nobody has called me the N-word, I have not had to trespass on too much private property, no bladder accidents, and I have gained so much more free time to do the things I really am passionate about. It was a sacrifice I wanted to and kind of needed to make, but I'm just glad that I'm able to get out of this paradigm. Also, that girl from November texted me back after I quit and I sent her over to PS to handle. Also, before I was removed from the Discord, I think more than half the other leaders also quit the company. So sometimes I think of myself as starting a leader walkout to show that this job made us mad as hell and we're not going to take this anymore. My family was so happy on the news, and I've been able to hang out with them so much more. This was just the catharsis I needed, and it, dare I say, emotionally saved me from a dark force. Sometimes I think about it, and I start to sing to myself, na 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 na, na 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 na, hey, goodbye. So, with all of that over 4 hours talked about, this is where the video comes to an end. Thanks for watching and listening if you made it all the way through. This script was literally 92 pages, and I thought volume 11 was a mouthful. I promise the next volume won't be as negative or as long. If you enjoy this type of content, feel free to like, comment, or subscribe if you see so fit. I will not force you to do anything. Nevertheless, this has been SupernovaBlade, and goodbye.